Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to Reynolds Community College. But I'd like to take back that greeting and utilize the greeting. A good friend of mine from Kenya, a colleague, talks about the mighty Maasai warriors who have been known to be the most fearsome and intelligent tribe in all of Africa. And their greeting is never hello, good morning, how you been? It's Kasarian and Jerry. Everywhere you go in Kenya, that is the greeting. And that greeting means, and how are the children? That is how they greet each other in that culture. Kasarian and Jerry, and how are the children? With the knowledge that if the children are not okay, then nothing else can be okay. And so I offer you those greetings as you engage in your work, focusing on our children, their future, and what we can do as educators to lift them up and center them in all of the work that we do. It is my great honor this morning to welcome all of you, but also to welcome the Honorable Secretary of Education and friend, Dr. Amy Gadara. Please welcome to Reynolds. Welcome, Secretary Gadara. We wish you all a wonderful day with fruitful work ahead. Kasarian Anjeri, and how are the children? Secretary Gadara.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pando, and thank you for setting the tone for the entire day. That matters to remember what we're all here about. So I'm really excited to be here for so many reasons. Most importantly, because this work matters, and you all know that because you're here, and I'm thrilled to say good morning also to everyone online. And can you all hear us and see us okay? I'm looking at you at the screen, you're probably over there somewhere. So hello, good morning. This work matters so much, and I bring greetings and welcome and thanks from Governor Youngkin for you all doing this work as well. And I look forward to getting down to business. But I was reflecting last night as I was thinking about remarks and looking at the agenda for today, that this is the focus on early childhood education and having quality childcare. But I hate using the word childcare because it's more than that. It is about early childhood education. It's about setting up our children for success. Has been part of my entire 35-year career. And this matters. From the very beginning of my career, I started at the National Governors Association. And one of the first things I had the privilege of doing was running a task force for business leaders and governors on school readiness. And it was data-based, you won't be surprised by that. Governor Voinovich had said to me, I want a index-sized piece that governors could put in their suit pocket, because at that point there were no female governors. So he was thinking about this, about you could put in. He goes, I want a one index card with all the research that shows why this is the best investment that business leaders and governors together can make. I went from there and I worked at the National Alliance of Business, and there I led a coalition of business leaders both across the nation, but also in the national level called the Business Coalition for Education Reform. And at that place, one of the pieces we did was to do a concerted effort to have business leaders' voices heard and to talk in a concerted and a coordinated way with policymakers to reinforce the need to invest in high quality early childhood education, because people know, and business leaders know, you all know, they're business leaders, that when we make the investments at the right time, great things happen. And that's what early childhood is all about. And then at my time during the data quality campaign, we were all about launching longitudinal data systems across the country, but also we knew that we needed to have a special focus on early childhood data systems. And so after we had gotten the longitudinal data system campaign launched, we also took effort of working with the early childhood community and launching the Early Childhood Data Collaborative, the ECCE, which is still in action today. So as I reflect, of all the things that have been constant in my career as an educational policy nerd, the focus on high quality early childhood education matters. And for those reasons, I'm so thrilled to join you as being a part of this commission so that in Virginia, we can build the best in class early childhood system in the nation. We are far on that track of doing that, thanks to the leadership of so many people in this room. And I want to say thank you to all the policymakers and leaders who have done the hard work to get us to this point beforehand. And we're now at a point of inflection of how do we take all of that hard work and build on that foundation and truly continue to focus on keeping doing the things that are working. And then this commission's task is how do we reflect and say, what do we need to double down on? What do we need to change at this point? And what do we need to do that's new? And that really is our charge. And the team has been so well organized, but you all have an incredible packet in front of you. It was sent out to you. But I just want to make sure that we're all really clear about what we're doing here because it matters. So if you all can join me and open up your packets, it's the second piece. It's the statute that establishes this commission on early childhood care and education. And don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I do want to read one really important sentence so that as we start this work together, we're very clear about what we're going to do together to make Virginia have the best in class early childhood system. So the Commission on Early Childhood Care and Education, the Commission, is hereby established for the purpose of providing recommendations for and tracking progress on the financing of a comprehensive birth to 5 early childhood care and education system as established in a statute that provides stable, high quality early childhood care and education services for families who need them the most, empowers parents with choices that meet their needs and preferences, and supports both school readiness and workforce preparation. I think one of the things that's so important I want to stress there is that, Secretary Slater, the Secretary of Labor, is also on the steering committee with me because this is a critical piece, that this is the right thing to do by families. It's the right thing to do for setting up our education system for success by ensuring that every child shows up in kindergarten ready to learn. But it's also, as you all know by being here, a central part of how we build the most robust talent development system in the country, if not the world. We know the race for talent is on. We know that the state that invests in its people is going to be the state that wins. We know that our employers and companies that we want to not only come to Virginia, but to stay in Virginia are looking for that talent development system. And we also know from our employers, they need to know that their workers are going to have access to high quality care. So this is just a win-win-win. So no pressure, but we have a lot of things to focus on and to get right because a lot of people are counting on us to do this. But it's really, really important that this commission starts. So I'm going to thank the General Assembly for making this possible. I'll have a special thanks for Delegate Coiner, who's going to be leading us for her leadership in this as well. But this is all about setting a vision. It's about communicating that vision, and it's making sure that we're thoughtful about how do we take the steps together, the employer community, our nonprofit community, parents organizations, policymakers, how do we work together to make sure that as we build vibrant communities, we are building vibrant, safe, healthy, education-focused, developmentally appropriate early childhood education. Because we know that if we're going to be true to building Virginia as the best place to live, to work, and to raise a family, that cannot happen without investing in our early childhood. Because we know, and I'll use some of Elliot's wonderful research, which is my favorite research study that I ever quote that he did. We know that no matter how great our K-12 education system is, there is no way that we can catch up a child who shows up at kindergarten not ready to learn. We know this from the research. We know this from the brain imaging that's been able to happen the last 15 years, that if we do not have the early childhood education that keeps those synapses firing, that is developing our children, is making sure that they're ready for success, they can never catch up. And we know the research shows that, and we also know that in our hearts because we've experienced it in our own homes and with children we love. So this work is important, and I want to make sure that we're also clear about what we're going to be talking about. And I invite you also, you have stickies on your table, and one of the things that we're going to be doing is trying to make this as interactive as possible, so there'll be lots of times to interact. But I want to make sure that there are things that anybody says that's sitting up here, we want to make sure your voices are part of this conversation. So there are things that come up, say, don't agree with that, or I want to double down on that, or I want to add to that, right on the stickies. And the team's going to be running around collecting those so that everyone's voice is kept in the way, kept in the process as we go. But these are the pieces that we want to go deep and explore as we're talking about this, as we do a commission. And again, if you think we're missing something on this, let us know what else we want to add to this list. First of all, we want to have this commission understand the existing birth to 5 landscape in Virginia. What is the current state? Where are we? What's working? What's not working? Including how it's financed and the important role that public-private partnership plays in this, which is so, so important. Second of all, we want to quantify the key aspects of the system, including the availability, the affordability, the quality, and the cost and the potential ROI. Again, many of you that know my background, I am all about using data as a flashlight and also as a tool of accountability, right? And this is about how do we hold ourselves as adults accountable by using data, by using metrics, by defining success, by using data to make sure that we are serving all of our children well. Third of all, we want to look at trends and project the demand from Virginia families for early childhood programming into the future. Again, using data as a tool for predictions and planning. And we want to analyze the data and use research-based insights to make recommendations to ensure that everything that we do is based on data and based on evidence. And I would argue, as spending a career as an advocate, successful advocates, which you all are by being in this room, are people who come to the table, not just with passion, which you have, but come with facts and with research and with data. And so that's one of the reasons I think we have one of the best in class systems is that we have built this system based on data and evidence and on best practice. And to me, that's some of the pieces that we have to double down on is how do we continue to be one of the best in class systems by having best in class data and making sure that we also have a culture that uses that information for continuous improvement and to also identify areas that aren't working so that we can make sure we're focusing on that. Finally, we're going to come together and very importantly, set goals and provide recommendations to enable Virginia to achieve this shared vision. So what we're hoping some of these recommendations are, and this is where you can start scribbling and saying, let's make sure we talk about this, but we're going to talk about financing, right? That we know one of the huge, not so hidden elephants in the room is how do we make sure that we pay for this? We know that that there has been an incredible amount of federal dollars into the system, and we know that financing cliff is going to come. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about is how do we then finance this after the federal dollars give out? What do we do? How do we be strategic? How do we plan for that moment? How do we also make sure that we're able to meet the demand, the growing demand of families and businesses? And here's one of the great pieces. People are moving into Virginia and companies are coming in here. And we know that because the demand for quality childcare and early childhood education is growing. That is a great sign, but that means that this commission needs to do its work fast because we've got a lot to do to make sure we have the workforce and we have the slots and we have the quality to make sure we continue to attract and serve those companies. We also need to focus on recommendations that will retain, grow, and strengthen the quality of our workforce. We also know, you all know this, that this is one of the greatest challenges. We have lots of shortages in Virginia right now in some high demand areas, and early childhood workers is one of those high demand areas. We're talking a lot in the administration with our partners in the General Assembly about creative ways to incent people to go into those high need areas. And I'm really excited to have the work of this commission help inform our conversations that we're having, getting ready for the legislative and the budget cycle, to make sure that we also take advantage of this biennium to think about how do we incent more people, how do we make it possible to train more folks to go into early childhood education throughout the Commonwealth, especially in the areas where we have childcare deserts. And we also want to make recommendations about how do we promote that continual use of data so that we can make the decisions and be relentlessly focused on outcomes. I am all about outcomes. I'm all about defining what success looks like and then keeping ourselves honest by making sure that we're looking at that data in a regular time. So I'm just excited because these are all things that I feel like for 35 years I've been thinking about. And I'm really excited to be in a room of people who can make a difference and not just make recommendations, but help change the conversation, change the decisions, and change the future trajectory of early childhood education. So thank you for what you're doing. And it's really nice to see so many familiar, friendly faces, and I look forward to meeting everybody in this room. And on that note, let's make sure we start meeting right now, everyone who's in the room, and get to know who we'll be working with together on this commission. So I'm going to invite everyone to start. I'm going to start with, I think I'm going to start with the yellow table right there, and then we'll go across the room and then the back. But if everyone can introduce your name, your role in your organization, and one thing that you really hope that this commission focuses on. So I'm going to start with the yellow table. Warning, we'll go that direction, and then we'll go. That's great. And then why don't you stand up and use a big voice.
Hi, everybody. Ashley Allen. I'm a parent representative. I live in Marengo County and have a audacious 3.5-year-old daughter. And I think that a couple things, I think the biggest thing I see as a parent right now is access being the number one issue, and that's not just cost, but that's also availability of any program at all for families, period. Not even a good one, bad one, just a program, period.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Oh, we have microphones. Thank you. Thank you.
President CEO for United West Southwest Virginia. One big thing I'm excited about mostly is if we can help figure out the business and the financing model in early childhood education. I think there's a lot of numbers we need to look at and a lot of things we need to think about in those areas that can help those businesses be more profitable, expand and grow, and ultimately meet that need.
Good morning, Danny Abula, bad at following directions. I will make my way to the green table shortly. But I saw Travis and just got so excited, wanted to come sit with him. I am the Commissioner of Social Services for the state of Virginia, but by training a pediatrician and public health doc. And so I think a lot of what I would bring to this is a real look at prevention of adverse childhood experiences, early exposure to love, support, literacy, all the things that are so important in those very, very early days and months.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm John Saley. I'm an LCSW with Family Insight and the Chief Compliance Officer. We have about 10 sites across Virginia. This has been a topic dear to my heart since, well, my son's 30 now, and I was a stay-at-home dad 28 years ago. And I mean, it's the same issues. It has gotten better than it was 30 years ago, but I'm with what you said, Dr. Vila.
Good morning, everybody. Kathy Glazer, President of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. And my hope is that we will succeed with having absolutely the right people in the room as members of this commission to have success with everything folks have already talked about, financing and access for families.
I'm going to pause for a second. Can everyone on the screen, can you all hear everybody? Okay, just to make sure. Good. Thank you. Okay, please go.
Well, I'm not sure which way to turn in this room. Good morning. My name is Edmund Hughes. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for HII. You're probably, who is HII? Huntington Ingalls Industries. But as Chief Human Resources Officer, what I'd like to get out of this, this is an investment in our workforce of the future. And so if we educate young kids, that's our future workforce. So it's truly an investment. It's a really, really, really early investment, but it pays off in the end. And from an employee standpoint, providing childcare and services for our workforce is a tremendous benefit to employees, and everyone faces that challenge. So those are just a couple of the items. Some of them sound slightly selfish and self-serving, but I think it's for the good of our workforce overall. So thank you.
I'm going to try the other side of the room. Lisa Coons, I am the State Superintendent of Public Instruction for Virginia. Very blessed and honored to be in Virginia. I think the work that has been laid in front of us to just get to this table is incredible and a great testament to how important early childhood is as a whole to our state, and the opportunity to continue to think about giving our youngest children bright and healthy futures. You talked about love and brain development and education. We talked about the workplace perspective. Both these are our future workforce, and our families need to trust the places that our children are there so they can be part of the workforce. I think there are so many things that intersect about early childhood, but it is about our youngest people in Virginia and an opportunity to serve them first. So I'm very excited and hopeful to be here. And selfishly, I have one of those youngest people as a grandchild. She is 9 months old. So I have a personal investment as well as an investment as the state superintendent. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm David Suderline. I represent the Roanoke and New River Valleys and part of Southwest Virginia in the state Senate, where I'm on the Education Health Committee. And I worked with the commission in the past, and also in the time in between, my wife became a preschool teacher. So that was fun to be a little more informed from another perspective.
Good morning. My name is Billy Reed. I am an advisor to the Secretary of Labor and here in his place today. I am interested in learning about the workforce issues that we're going to be talking about. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Winkle. I'm a Senior Vice President at CoStar Group, and I'm also a recent transplant to Virginia. I moved my family 9 months ago. I have a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old. And I think I agree with all of the comments about accessibility, availability, I think sustainability as well, because oftentimes these are flash in the pan. We do something, but in 5 years, 10 years down the line, we run into the same problems. As a major employer who's investing heavily in Richmond in particular, one of the challenges that I personally experienced was, what do we do about supporting a family? I told our CEO and our chief HR officer, I cannot move my family to Virginia until I know that they are in a healthy, well cared for, competent facility, because I can't leave what I have if I'm uncertain about it. And we are trying to move thousands of employees to Richmond. And it's something that I have concerns about for my own team as well. And so from an existing workforce development as well as a future workforce development, I'd love to be, the connector, using this group to be the connector between those two, multi-generational impact.
Good morning. I'm Benita Petrella. I am the owner of the Primrose School of Midlothian Village. I'm here on behalf of the private childcare sector. I'm the vice president of the board on the board of the Virginia Child Care Association, which again represents private childcare centers. I also was an attorney for a long time. I was an attorney at Hunt and Williams for 13 years, left the law in part because of the challenges of being a working parent and the childcare issues that we face. Together, my husband and I have 5 children. So I'm a mom of 3, a bonus mom of 2. And the childcare issues that we faced were significant and brought us to a passion for finding early childhood care and education that was of high quality for our children. I think one of the things that I'd like to bring to the table is remembering that it's got to be a public-private partnership, that you cannot cut out the private piece of this. This is not a public solution only. It's got to be a combination, and you cannot cut out the legs from the private sector in finding a public solution.
I'll go this way.
Good morning. My name is Belinda Astrop. I am the chair of the Board of Supervisors for Greensville County. I'm also the Family Engagement Coordinator for Greensville County Public Schools, and formerly the legislative aide for Delegate Rosalind Tyler, who was the chair of the Education Committee for the state. So I'm excited to be here. I'm a key believer in economic development. The key to economic development is your education system. If you have your education system where it should be, the jobs will come. If we start to work with the entire family, that's where we win.
Hi, I'm Stacey Vance, and I'm nervous. Like, if you give me a group of 4-year-olds, I'm totally fine. But a group of adults, like, y'all make me nervous. I don't know why. I teach pre-K for Bristol, Virginia Public Schools, and I've been in the education field for about 15 years, and it's changed obviously since I first started. And I just kind of want to see, as an educator perspective, just to let people know, like, the value of sending your kid to preschool and the impacts it does have on them when they get to kindergarten. I mean, you can see a big difference between kids that attended pre-K and kids that did not. Just to let people know, and have people above us, like, who make decisions, policymakers and decision makers, kind of know, like, what we go through as an educator, like all the tests. They do show data. I mean, we show growth, but not to put all the pressure. They're 4. Some of them join us when they're 3, So just make people aware of the importance of coming to pre-K, and finances for parents. Let them know, and value parents, educate them to know, hey, you're welcome to school. You may have not had a good school experience, but we will, work together, and I become friends with parents. So we kind of want to make that, homeschool connection.
Good morning. I'm Todd Norris. I'm Senior Vice President of Community Health and System Advancement for Ballard Health. Ballard serves a 21 county region in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, so 11 counties and 2 independent cities in our geographic service area in Southwest Virginia. I'm also the CF board member. We are childcare operators as a health system already. We have 3 centers now and are going to be developing 11 new centers over the next 3 or 4 years, making a major investment, both from the standpoint of workforce development and the stability of our healthcare workforce, but also the very important strategy of preparing children for kindergarten entry. We agree with what the secretary said and what many others have said today, that early care and education environment is essential to preparing children for educational success and not falling behind by the 3rd grade and following to achieve their all the benchmarks that are important ultimately to college and career readiness. So we're thrilled with all the progress that Virginia has already made in this regard and setting the bar and making significant progress over the last 3-4 years. We're excited to see what advancements are coming and to make sure that everything that's already been done can be preserved and sustained. It's great to be a part of this group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam Edmond from the State Senate, and I'm late, so I don't know the format of this activity, but I'm happy to be here, believe in early childhood education, and hope that we'll be discussing workforce challenges among other things. Thank you.
Do we want to, I would love to have everyone in the back of the room also introduce themselves since we're all here. Is that okay? And then we'll do, and then we're coming to you online, folks, who are coming next. Just I want you to make sure that you know who's in the room as well.
I was looking to them. Good morning. I'm Jenna Conway. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Early Childhood Care and Education here at the Virginia Department of Education.
Good morning. Karen Bowles with the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. Alex McPherson with the Virginia Department of Education.
Good morning. I'm Tiara West, Associate Director of Early Childhood Data Systems with VDOE.
Hi, I'm Denise Branscombe. I'm the Associate Director of Grants and Finance with DOE.
Oh, that's okay. Aisha Sludge with Communications at VDOE.
And I'm Becca Ulrich. I'm the Director of Early Childhood Access and Enrollment at the department.
And do we want to do everyone too? Just, I'm a big fan that folks in the room, let's all introduce ourselves. So.
Hi, everybody. Sam Edwards, just a private citizen.
Hi, I'm Danielle Jankowski, private citizen.
Hello, Maddie Bussey with Two Capitals Consulting, just here as a member of the public. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Margie Gerganis. I'm with McGuire Woods Consulting.
Sydney Green, McGuire Woods Consulting.
Henry Atkinson. I'm here with Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee.
Gabby Hernandez. I'm here with Child Savers.
Good morning, everyone. Jeremy Bennett with the Virginia Association of Counties, VACO.
Good morning, Christina Hagan, State Director for the Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy. We're a proud partner to the Virginia Promise Partnership, which does a lot of childcare advocacy. And I am also a mom to a 3.5-year-old and a 15-month-old. So also here as a private citizen.
Good morning, Erica Browdy, Director of Superintendent Operations at VDOE.
Elliot Regenstein from Foresight Law and Policy, and you'll be hearing from me shortly.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you to everybody for doing that. We're going to turn to folks online also. But before we do that, for those of you with the stickies, please write down what you said you want to get out of this. You'll make the team. I know the team is taking notes, but it'd be really great one to just get in the habit of writing things down. We want to make sure we're capturing your thoughts in all kinds of ways. So just please write down the most important thing you want to get out of this would be terrific. And anything else that you want to share would be terrific. All right, I'm going online. And Doug Coiner, I'm going to start with you. And then we're going to do this because we should have all figured this out over the last 3 years of Zooms and Teams and everything about how to do this. We're going to have you tag the next person to make it not so awkward about who's going next. But Delegate Coiner, and thank you for joining us on your vacation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Secretary Gadar. It's great to be with you all. I'm Carrie Coiner. I proudly serve the current 62nd House District, redrawn as the 75th House District. I also chair our Early Childhood and Innovation Subcommittee for House Education and serve on the House Education Committee, General Laws and Appropriations. I am most excited about getting out of our work, reduced anxiety and stress. You know, one of the most stressful things for families is figuring out who will care for their babies through their toddlers. And one of the most stressful things as a legislator is what feels like a fire drill every year, knowing we need to help our families have access to great quality early childhood. And we seem to have to run around every year trying to work collectively to figure out how we fund it and what policies need in place. So I'm looking forward to our work here, reducing stress and anxiety across the Commonwealth. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my favorite Zoom background. Sonia, I'm sorry I can't see your last name on your Zoom, but you had kids playing in your background before we got started, and I had so much joy watching them. So I'm going to kick it over to you. I'm going to remind all my Zoom teammates, click unmute before you talk.
Sonia Jones. I am a family child care provider in Rocky Mount, Virginia. I am licensed for 12 children. I'm sorry if y'all see me going back and forth because I do have employees, but they're really excited today. I'm the upcoming vice president of Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care. I'm looking forward to working with this group in order to provide parents and family children that we serve quality child care and additional resources for the providers in family child care field.
And so you get to choose, you get to tag someone who's next.
David.
Very good. Hey, thank you very much. David Bulova. I represent the 37th House District, which is the city of Fairfax, George Mason University, and parts of Fairfax County. Really great to be here with everybody. I'm a member of General Laws, Ag and Natural Resources, and also Appropriations on the Education Subcommittee, and have been really pleased to work with a number of people in this meeting, including online and in person, on early childhood education initiatives. So a veteran of the consolidation process that we put in place a couple of years ago, as well as getting the Ready Regions legislation put through. But to me, this is really foundational. There's probably no more important investment that we can make than an early childhood education. I've got 3 children myself, one of which is still in high school. But all 3 went through pre-K and through childcare, and so we can attest to the importance of that, as well as the quality. We can also attest to the fact that it's extraordinarily expensive, and that quality pre-K is really out of the reach of many hardworking Virginians. And so making sure that we expand that access, I think is going to be a key thing for this commission to look at. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Delegate Mike Cherry.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there with you. We're down in Pensacola, Florida this week, and I'll be on the beach as soon as this is over. So there you go for all of you. I do serve with Delegate Coiner on the Early Childhood Innovation Subcommittee of the Education Committee in the House. I represent the 66th House District currently and 74th, and I'm anxious to see what comes out of this. I am an educator by trade. I run a Christian school, and so I'm anxious to see how this public-private partnership can benefit all of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And with that, Simon, jump in, and you're up next, sir.
All right, thank you. So I'm Simon Fiscus. I'm the executive director of Skyline CAT, but I am representing community action agencies across the state. We serve 90% of all of Virginia's counties and cities, with approximately 50% of those running early childhood programs. I myself have been involved with Head Start for over 20 years, and my wife is a principal in the public school system for 20 years. So we have lots of discussions about early childhood at home with our 3 children as well. We're looking forward to seeing accessible funding resources used to maximize enrollment for the quality programs that we provide to allow Virginia's workforce to continue to thrive. And with that, I'll turn it over to, let's see, everyone on my screen has talked already, to Elizabeth Bennett.
Good morning. I'm Delegate Elizabeth Bennett Parker. I currently represent parts of Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax. This is Emma, and she is why we're off camera and generally on mute. But thankful for the opportunity to be here, thankful for Delegate Coiner's leadership on this issue, and looking forward to listening in. Thanks.
I love members of the commission who bring props. That's good. So that's good. And congratulations, Delegate, on Emma. Sounds good.
Delegate Campbell, do you want to go next?
Good morning. I'm Delegate Campbell. I represent the 24th, soon to be the 36th, and I am your newest member of the House of Representatives, number 100. And as a mother of 5 girls and a grandmother of 7, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I live in a rural area. We do not have enough childcare and early childcare programs here for the citizens, and it really impacts our workforce. But most importantly, it really impacts the quality of education that they can get when they finally make it into kindergarten. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and I can't wait to see what we can do to make things better for everyone in Virginia.
Whoops. And I'll just tag Rachel. Why don't we go to you?
Hi, I'm Rachel Williams. I work in the Norfolk Christian Schools in Norfolk Private School. I teach pre-K 4. I've done about 15 years in the classroom between pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. And I'm just excited to see what kind of changes you all have in mind and ways that we as classroom teachers can help put in our insight into new ideas as well. And let me see. How about Becca?
Oh, just, oh, okay, okay, okay. We're set. How about someone else, Rachel? We've got someone here. That's our facilitator.
Oh,
who's
okay.
doing everything.
Gotcha. Let's see.
This is Stacy. I can go next.
Thank you.
And I apologize for not being there. I too am also on vacation in the Dominican Republic. So just like Mike, as soon as we
You guys are
end, I will-
devoted. I love this. This is amazing to get. We're coming with you on the text, and we're all going to Maine or Pensacola or the Caribbean. That's great.
That's
All right.
right. Like
Yeah.
Mike, I'm ready for the beach when we're done, but this is great work. I look forward to being involved. I am the principal and Virginia Preschool Initiative Coordinator for Petersburg City Public Schools. I have 24 years of experience in education. 6 of those years has taken place at Westview, where all of our publicly funded Head Start, VPI, and early childhood special education students are. So we have about 400 3- and 4-year-olds that are there in our building. And from my experience working with elementary, I know how important the work of early childhood persons are, because it does help with getting our children ready for a successful start to their education career that can support them through kindergarten through 12th grade and for the rest of their lives. So I look forward to being involved, providing input, and learning from this group. Thank you so much.
Okay. Who has not gone? I guess Shakiva.
I apologize. I'm out. So I'm Shakiva Frazier. I am a parent representative in Danville, Virginia. I look forward to being a part of this, and something that I would like to see, which I know it won't be a problem here, is that I'm very active in different community things, and sometimes we go to meetings and we don't really see the change that we're looking for. But I know with this, on this level where we're at, that we will see something come forward where we actually pushing the envelope to see affordable education and childcare for our young babies.
Thank you. I'm going to just go to Leah. Oops. Leah, you there?
Sorry, just have to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Leah. I'm with the State and Local Policy Clinic at the University of Virginia Law School. So we're helping with sort of the data side of this and being able to provide support for these important decisions. So thank you.
Great. Who has not gone? I know we've got Becca and Karen, you all I know. Do you want to introduce yourselves? You're here. Okay. Oh, Of course, what you just said. Sorry, I'm like looking there. Thank you. I have not had enough coffee this morning. Obviously, I'll be going directly there. Anyone who's not in the room and introduce themselves, who wants to introduce themselves online. Okay, thank you everyone for taking the time to do that. I'm a huge fan, again, another data piece that research has shown in operating rooms, that in rooms where everyone around the operating table has a beginning and there's a protocol for introducing themselves before surgery, that people are more likely to speak up during the surgery and note things that are not going well, and that has reduced the number of errors in operating rooms. I'm a big fan that when people share their voice in the beginning of a meeting, they're more likely to use it throughout. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. We want everyone to feel like they have a voice in this conversation, and we don't want you to be talked at. We want you to be part of this conversation. So please you all have done a great job. Keep the sticky notes coming. And online, you guys have already been practicing best practice by putting things in the chat. Please keep doing that because we will make sure we're capturing all of it. And I really want to say thank you again to all of you who are calling in from near and far and here in this room for just being committed to this work. And it matters. And we're going to get down to this work, but it was important to do the introductions. I have one order of business to make sure that we're legit and formal. A couple of those things. One is we need to vote on a virtual meeting policy to make sure that we're actually doing everything correctly. You have that policy in front of you. Again, I'm not going to read it to you. And I'm assuming everyone online, you all have everything in front of you as well. And please always online yell if you can't hear us. If you're missing something, just let us know how we make sure we're serving you well. Bottom line is that public bodies are required under state law to have a policy that governs members' virtual participation in meetings. And the draft policy in front of you reflects language in state code and mirrors the policy used by other public organizations in the Commonwealth. Our ultimate goal is to have members attend commission meetings in person, but this policy will allow us to offer flexibility for those folks that want to go swimming and be in the sunshine and do good things too. And we appreciate you guys taking the time for doing that. So thank you. Please take a moment to skim this policy. Because we're going to ask you to vote on it. This is going to be your first thing that you do as a commission member. So please take a look. And if there are any questions from anybody on this, look at online too, see. Okay, if there are no questions, I would love to entertain a motion to approve the policy. Great. Who can we make a note of who? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. Yep. Thank you, Senator. And is there a second? Thank you so much. And all in favor? And online, if you all can just raise your hands on your chat would be great, either live or the fake ones. That's great. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Anyone opposed? Awesome. Motion passes. We now have a policy about virtual meetings, and we've done our first piece of work. The second piece I want to do is that we need to also elect our chair. And according to the statute, the chair must be a legislative member of the commission and the vice chair must be a non-legislative member representing the private business sector. I am so pleased to recommend Delegate Carrie Coiner and Gary Thompson of Thompson Consulting as chair and vice chair. And I ask for your approval for that recommendation slate. Members can participate in the voting by here or raising your hand and online as well. But and I don't know, Delegate Coiner, if you want to say a few words, and Gary, if you want to say a couple words too before we vote.
I just want to say again, really excited about the work that we're doing. I met all last summer with members of the business community and in our amazing childcare sector, and just really excited to see a permanent place for all of us to come together. So excited for the work ahead.
Awesome. And Gary, he's not here today. Okay, I didn't think so. Okay, he's not here, but I know that folks are very excited about having him serve in that role. All in favor of this leadership slate, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Awesome. Thank you. The motion passes. Delegate Coiner, I will now call you Chair Coiner of the Commission. So thank you very, very much for your leadership. We'll look forward to having Gary here as well. I also just want to say thank you to folks. This work is supported by the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. And you all had a chance to meet the folks doing this, and also supported by the incredible team at the Virginia Department of Education. I want to say thank you So much work has gone into getting to this moment, not just around the commission, but about just creating the momentum and doing the hard work of getting us to this point in Virginia. So I just want to pause and say thank you. This work was made possible, not just about this meeting, but about why we can have these conversations due to these two organizations, specifically their leadership. And I want to say thank you for all that you've done today too. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Superintendent, for your team, for Jenna, for all of your leadership. Thank you. Thank you. I also just want to point out that there are two ex officio positions on the steering committee, and that is myself as Secretary of Education and Secretary Slater as Secretary of Labor. And I know I will speak for Secretary Slater to say we're both very, very excited and proud to serve on this committee and on this commission and on the steering committee and take this very seriously. And I'll have some members of my team coming as well so that you can meet them as well, and they'll be taking part in this as well. The steering committee will be made up of our chairwoman, Coiner, Vice Chair Gary Thompson, Kathy Glazer at the VECF, Nicholas Palacio, who's one of the 3 parent representatives on the commission. And we're just very excited to have this steering committee in place as well. Kathy, we don't need to vote on the steering committee, do we? Or should we vote? We do need to vote. Okay, one more time. All in favor of that steering committee, as I just read that slate, please say aye. Raise your hand. Anyone opposed? That motion passes as well. All right, we are now official. We can work online. We have leadership. We've got a steering committee. It's all good. Please help yourselves. Everyone knows the restrooms are out that door. Please feel free to get up and stretch, move around, help yourself to coffee, to water. We'll have lunch coming in. Please always just ask questions, be interactive. I feel very far away from you all, but I know I can't come down there because of the cameras and the screen. But we want this to be as informal as possible and as interactive as possible. So please let's set that tone that this is a group working together, listening to each other and working together. So welcome, and we're glad to get down to business. Kathy, Jenna, am I missing anything business before we dive in? All right, then let's go. I'm going to invite Elliot to come on up, and Delegate Coiner, virtually, you're here at the front table, as we're going to start with now just diving into the work of why we're here and having this happen. So I'm thrilled that Elliot is here. Elliot and I was thinking, Elliot, after I left you last night, how long we've known each other. And I think it was like 2007 or 8 when I went out to Illinois, and Elliot was leading the move to develop a statewide longitudinal data system in Illinois. And we are so, so lucky to have Elliot as a long-term consultant and working with us in Virginia. He is probably one of the premier experts, if not the expert, on early childhood education and specifically around the use of data in the country. And so anytime I have a question at any point in my career, I call Elliot and say, help me on this. We're also so fortunate to have Jenna in this position. As soon as I got named secretary, Elliot actually sent me a note and he goes, whatever you do, love on Jenna. So so that was the thing. It was great advice. So Jenna, thank you for just the leadership you've brought. We brought best in class from Louisiana up to Virginia, and we're now going to lap Louisiana thanks to that. So thank you, Jenna, for your incredible leadership. So it's good. So I want to start with a story because I believe as we work together, it's also important to know each other. I told you all the reasons about why throughout my career for 35 years, I have focused on early childhood education and why it's been probably one of the things I'm most passionate about. But I want to talk about a mom because I have a very personal experience with the Virginia Early Childhood Center system. So I was a working mom, husband and I are working, and we were sharing a nanny. I was working part-time when my 2 daughters were young, and I was sharing a nanny with a next door neighbor, and I was at work. And I was at a really important meeting. I was having lunch with the chief of staff to the U.S. Department of Education Secretary of Education. So my phone started ringing and I ignored it, and it started ringing some more and I ignored it again. And then it rang again, and my mom instinct going off. I'm like, I'm a mom. This is a 703 number. I'm in the district. I need to pick up this phone call. And I got the call that no parent ever wants to get, which is, this is the police. Your daughter is fine, but she's in custody of the police and your nanny's been arrested. And so at that moment, my heart still beats as I talk about it. It was kind of chaos and trying to figure out how to reach my husband. We were sharing a car. We had to get out to get our child out of jail. She was a year old. And long story short, I'm glad you're laughing, Danny, because I can laugh now. And the number of people who sent us orange jumpsuits for Christmas that year was funny. But it's also a tragedy, right? It was a case, and I'll tell you that you all know this, and we all have our stories. This is part 2. So after we got Anne out of the police station, and it turned out that and this is is, you can find humor in this. Anne, who at that point was a year old, was being used as the decoy in a shoplifting ring. She was being pushed around Tyson's Corner Mall. She was the cute girl in the front of the stroller. And I always thought it was awesome that our nanny took out the stroller all the time for walks. Turns out she was using a double stroller to stuff things in underneath, and she was sending the money that she was making back to her home in Africa. So there's just so much tragedy in this story. But we got her out, and I went home that night, and Bill and I had this conversation. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't go to work tomorrow. I can't go to work without knowing that my baby's going to be safe. And now the trust was broken, that sense of how do I do this? And then I sat, but I loved working, and we were a young family. We needed the income, but also I loved working. And I was working on these issues of childcare. And so I went online and I was like, what do I do? How do we do this? How do we support, finding someone that's safe and that we secure? I was Googling things. I was sitting there. We were living in Fairfax County, and I came across the parent provided family home childcare services. And what attracted me to that is that there were all these assurances. I started reading about the training. I started reading about what was happening, the fact that the parents were involved in the conversation. There was the fact that I could look up the records of all the people. I could choose who I wanted to have my child be with. I could find out everything I needed to know about that. And there was transparency, there was data, it was close to my home. I could go interview this woman. And all of a sudden I was like, if this doesn't work out, I'm never working again. That literally was where I was. I was so scarred. And so we did that for 3 years before our child went on to kindergarten. And it was amazing. The system worked. I went to every parent meeting. I went to all the trainings. I was fascinated like how it worked. But it was that experience with having a choice. I knew I didn't want my child in a large setting. I wanted her in a home. I wanted her to be with someone who would love and care. And when I think about Mrs. Malik and I think about what Best in Class is, it's Mrs. Malik. Mrs. Malik was loving. She was caring. She opened doors to my daughter in ways that we didn't have. She was from Pakistan, and still to this day, my daughter is the greatest exploratory eater in the entire world I know, because she talks about big things that Mrs. Malik made them. And she talks still lovingly and has kept in touch with Mrs. Malik because she was an important part of her life. That tragic story that turned into a really, really positive experience is one of the reasons that I'm here and I'm passionate about what we need to do in Virginia. We need to make sure that one, those tragic stories don't happen to more families. And two, that we make sure we provide the opportunity for every family to have faith, to have trust, and to have access to quality care so that they feel safe every time that they drop their child off or that someone comes into their home and does that. So it matters. And I know that every single person in this room could share a story like that, hopefully not involving the police. And Anne's fine, just to let you all know, she has not gone on to a life of crime. But it matters. And so that for me is why this work matters and why I appreciate what you all are doing. And for those of you calling in from vacation, the commitment that you have to this. But I want to take a couple moments and talk about that positive experience that ended up for me, those components about what we're looking for when we talk about Best in Class. I want to start first by talking about, again, my family, but in the other direction, my mom and dad. So I grew up as a daughter of an economist and a psychiatric social worker, which made for really interesting conversations about making sure people's needs were met and taking care of everybody, the mental health piece. But also I grew up in a household where markets work. And my dad always talked about to have an effective market work, which is what we're building, right? What we're building here in Virginia is an effective marketplace that meets the needs of people. And to have a market work, you need quality options, which is why our focus on quality is so important. We need quality information to make sure that people know what their options are and how they can access it. And we need quality dollars to make sure that people have the ability to access that quality option as well. If we have that, and we have the beginnings of that marketplace working here, and I would say we are building the country's premier public-private choice marketplace for early childhood education and childcare. And that matters. And that's something we all need to be proud of and we need to continue to build on. And I want to take a couple of minutes before I turn it to Delegate Coiner, Chairwoman Coiner, and Elliott for them to share their thoughts about Best in Class. But the couple of things I just very quickly want to go back over. I said a couple of these in my intro, but when I think about it, it's about how do we make sure that we put choice in that middle, and you won't be surprised by this, but that parents matter. We need to put parents in the driver's seat and make sure that they have those three things that drive. They need to have quality options, they need to have quality information to make decisions with, and they need to have quality dollars to be able to afford those quality options. We know that our family needs need to drive our growth about what we do, where we grow things. We need to meet those deserts that we heard about in the introductions. We need to make sure that we are meeting the needs of families so that they can have a sense of trust that the system is there to serve their family and meet their needs, and that they can go and be work in the workplace with no fear that their child is not being well cared for. We need to make sure that, and then the second piece is just high quality. We need to be relentless in this focus on high quality. And as I said earlier, we know this, we know in our heart that quality matters, but we now have research that just continues to just grow exponentially every year that proves that what we know in our gut about having high quality care, we know that it matters by watching literally children's brains die and shrivel because they have not had access to great care and not being able to learn to the level they were. You know, this administration believes deeply that we cannot lose another child. We must make sure that we are investing in children at all ages to make sure that they are prepared for success in life, and that starts in early childhood. Third of all, evidence and data. We have got to make our decisions with evidence. There is growing evidence, as I just said, that doing this and investing in early childhood matters, but we need to make sure that we put our dollars and our time and our energy into things that we know are working, and that we use data to drive those decisions. And we need to focus on the education piece. When we talk about best in class, we need to talk about the workforce and how do we make sure that we are attracting folks that are going to thrive as early childhood workers, and that we make sure that we continue to invest in them and grow and provide the training and provide the supports for these jobs that are so important. And so there's a whole that we're going to be talking about that. And we need to focus on continuous improvement, right? And this is why the data piece matters as well. We need to be relentless and honest with ourselves that we're not just going to collect data, which we now have one of the most robust data systems in the country here in Virginia, not just in K-12, and we're going to have it in higher ed, but in our early childhood, which is really amazing. But data just by being collected doesn't change anything. We need to have a culture where we use data and we're using it as a tool for continuous improvement and a tool for accountability. And we need to also be honest ourselves when we need to say, this isn't working here. So what does this data tell us? And now what do we need to change to get different results? And we need to be able to quantify what success looks like so that we can drive and use data to make sure that we're making continuously improvement to get to those results. So I'm hoping one of the main things that we talk about, and this is why having the business community part of this is so matter, this is what you all do in your sleep. You make every decision with data. You look at data, you wouldn't waste a dime on something that doesn't have results attached to it. So I'm really thrilled that this commission is made up of people that are coming to this challenge and this opportunity with different perspectives so that we can really benefit from how people problem solve and take advantage of opportunities. And then finally, we need to also think about the money piece, right? The compensation piece that's involved with our workers to make sure that we can incent folks to go into this work, to provide them the training, but also how do we expand and think about creative ways and new ways that haven't been thought about, and doubling down the ways that are working to make sure that we're also investing in the system to allow it to grow, to expand into areas that need it, but also making sure that we are ensuring that there's high quality. So this is all about getting better outcomes, and better outcomes are made up of all those different pieces: quality, choice, investing in people, building the workforce, quality, data, evidence. All of those pieces are critical, and we're going to make sure that we are using all of our resources. And I also want to do a shout out to the UVA team for the work that they've done to make sure that our data and our evidence and research is driving everything that we do. And so one of my questions, and one of the things I want to encourage all the commission members to do, is to ask a lot of questions. We have some amazing resources that are supporting you on this commission. Ask questions. What does the data tell us? Tell us what the research says. Who's doing this best in class? Why I love working for my boss. Every single conversation starts with, and Superintendent Coons are going to have a meeting today with the governor. He's going to start with this question: who's doing this better than we are? Who's best in class? And then how do we learn from that? And how do we do it better than they do? That's what this is about, right? How do we look across the United States and the world to say, who's building a world-class early childhood education system? How do we learn from that? What does the data tell us? What does the data tell us as we're doing this? And how do we continue to make changes to make sure that we're building the system of the future? Bottom line is, we are on the process of building a best-in-class system. This work is critical at this moment, and I just want to say thank you to everyone for doing that. Now I'm going to turn to Delegate Coiner, who, as you all know from her introduction, is just one of our leading thinkers in the General Assembly around education, around early childhood education. and is a passionate leader in our conversations in Richmond and across the Commonwealth. It's been such a pleasure to get to know Delegate Coiner, our chairwoman, over the last year and a half, 2 years. She was the first person I ever sat down and had coffee with after I was nominated, and I continue to turn to her for advice and counsel, and I'm just thrilled that she's leading this group. So Delegate Coiner, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you, Secretary. And again, sorry I cannot be there in person, but today's date worked for most people, and that's what we do. I'm thankful to have a little alone time as a parent of 3 kids. It's nice to be with you all in a quiet house right now. But when I look at why early childhood is so important, being a mom of 3 kids, I also had, similar to the Secretary, my own story of early childhood stressors. I had my first child and enrolled him in a private preschool, and being a full-time working mom, got phone calls almost every other day over being sick. And I was constantly having to go pick him up. And I quickly realized I wasn't going to be able to balance having a newborn in private daycare and being able to quickly leave and go get him all the time and meet the needs of my clients. So I was able and fortunate enough to transition over to some family help, and then finding someone as an in-home provider that had a little more flexibility for me. And then having 2 more kids, finding someone who was able to just be in-home care at my house. And being able to have choices and being able to shift and find those was hard. Finding someone to take care of your child who you could trust, who is going to care for them and love them, was really, really hard. So I feel for young parents. It's become even harder because of our workforce shortage and our childcare workforce area. So looking at where we are today, I started working with our early childhood and our workforce folks, really centered around the advocacy work I've done around early grade literacy. And what we know from brain science is that brain science demonstrates that learning and skill development are sequential and cumulative. And so if we don't take care of our youngest learners, our smallest little people in Virginia, and ensure that in their earliest years that they have access to not only care, but also those early learning skills through education, it's going to become more and more difficult to support them as learners in our K-12 system, and even more difficult to ensure that they have success with on-time graduation rates and grade level reading, and that they have unlimited academic opportunities based on what they want to learn and the journey that they want to take post-graduation. So some of the things that we're looking to get out of this for priorities: a smooth transition out of our early childhood years into our K-12 system, building on the fact that we have heard from our kindergarten teachers, they can tell which of their babies in their kindergarten class come from early child care experience and those who do not. And also looking at those transitions, ensuring that regardless of a choice that a parent makes, that their child is prepared and ready for kindergarten. That's as smooth as possible as we can make it for families. And then another top priority is around professional development. One of the key components that we have is ensuring that all of our early childhood educators across the Commonwealth have access to professional development that supports their capacity to help our children be school ready. And I know that our early childhood educators have been excited to learn more about the critical role of brain building, and that their work should be recognized, and that we focus on fairly compensating them so that we know we have access and quality. So another couple key points. One is around accountability. A top priority for all of us as legislators and as citizens, because it's your tax dollars that are going to support our families who are in need of access to quality childcare for our low and middle income families. Looking at the data behind, are we delivering the outcomes that we want and expect? And so a key component of our work is going to be looking at data, analyzing it, and helping us understand and document progress over time, but also making recommendations around things that are not working. We haven't always done a great job of saying, this isn't working, let's stop doing it. And so one of the key things for us in accountability as this commission are having those tough conversations when we see that the data isn't looking the way that we would expect it to for families. One of the things we're charged with, one of the 8 goals of the commission, is to support the development of an integrated early childhood longitudinal data process to connect access, quality, and workforce with preschool growth and school readiness data through 3rd grade. I spent some time this summer looking at what other states are doing, and I will tell you, a couple of our states to the south, North Carolina and South Carolina, have some great data tools that they're using right now that are really helping to connect those data points around access, quality, workforce, and school readiness. And so I'm going to challenge us to be a little competitive with some of our sister states, and that we ensure that we're using tools that are able to show us progress with data as well. And then also making sure that we're able to translate that data to our legislative and executive branches, that they are very clear from us as a commission around what we're seeing in terms of data. Another key component for our work with this commission is going to be centered around looking at our parents. Our parents are our current workforce. Yes, we are focused on our youngest learners being successful in K-12 so they can be our future amazing folks as employers and employees in Virginia, but really looking at our current workforce and our parent demand. One of the most stressful things for parents is figuring out who's going to take care of my kids, where are they going to be, are they safe, are they learning? And so ensuring that we have access for all families is critical. One of the things that we know is that there are many areas in Virginia that do not have adequate supply of childcare right now. Nearly half of Virginians live in childcare deserts without affordable options. As you heard Ashley Allen, one of our parent reps, say when she spoke up earlier, was there are wait lists. It is very hard just to find any kind of childcare in certain areas. So that's something that we hope to address. Also really looking at polling that we've seen from a lot of our businesses in Virginia. One of the top things that parent employees say is that having affordable childcare is negatively impacting their job and business productivity. So ensuring that we're listening to our business community and getting reactions from their employees about what their needs are and how we positively impact the future of economic growth in our Commonwealth. The last piece that we're going to be focusing on is really looking also at the early childhood care and education workforce stability and competencies. UVA did a report on turnover, compensation issues, and we saw a lot of turnover in our staffing, and it's really at a crisis level in Virginia. In April, they showed that 68% of subsidy participating centers had staffing challenges, and 63% of them had to serve less children and less families and had to turn them away because of staffing shortages. So definitely an area we need to look at and try to make recommendations around. We also saw from the data that there was a 49% turnover rate for assistant teachers in child care programs. So knowing that our lead classroom teachers are important, but having strong assistants in those classrooms again, leads to turning away children and families, and that shortage of access becomes a problem again. We also know that low compensation plays a role in these staffing turnover and challenges. So our commission will be looking at making recommendations around those compensation items as well. As Secretary Guerrero noted, we want to make sure that we are a voice for parent choice and options. And so one of the best things that we can do is listen to families, focus on the demanding schedules, and really try to meet the needs of individual preferences through our mixed delivery program. So I know that we're going to hear from Jenna Conway a little bit later about all the different options in mixed delivery. We're going to hear about our child care subsidy program. We're going to hear all about the amazing choices folks have, whether it's a center-based option, family day homes, for-profit, nonprofit, religious exempt. We are really focused on those public-private partnerships and ensuring that families are able to voice and make their choices for what they want. So to sum it up, We have a lot of must-dos. I just ran through, sort of my key bullet points as we met last summer and thinking about the work that we're going to be doing. But our goal should be that we are a strong runway for our kids in early grade literacy, that we're focused on that data, and that we are making recommendations centered around being accountable, increase access and choice, and focused on ensuring that our parents, I'm so glad I have so many parent reps on our commission, are really being listened to for what they say they need. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Secretary Gadara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so many great points that we'll be unpacking throughout the day and throughout our time together. So it's now my pleasure to turn my friend and colleague, Elliot Regenstein, who is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the nation's experts on the topics we're going to be talking about. And I know I'm going to keep peppering him with, tell me more about who's doing this better, what's the research say? And so I encourage you all to write lots of notes down as he's talking about what you want to know more about as he's talking, because he's going to give us an overview of what best in class looks like across this nation and how we can learn from that here in Virginia. So Elliot, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thanks, Amy. And, Amy and I have known each other for a very long time, and she's been a friend and mentor for a long time. Kathy and I know each other from the national early childhood scene going back a long way. And I've been a big fan of Jenna's work since Louisiana. So I'm just thrilled to be here with them and with this great group that you all have assembled. Even though I have to admit, I'm one of those Northerners who, like, anytime the temperature is over 80 degrees, just starts to melt down. But Delegate Coiner didn't invite me to join her remotely in Maine, so here I am. I want to reinforce a number of points that folks have made and put some of them in national perspective. But I want to start by saying that I think that the process that Virginia is using is one that really resonates when you look at the national experience of states that ultimately have been successful in their early childhood systems. And there were a number of states in the early days of sort of pre-K initiatives that had large splashy pre-K programs where they hadn't really thought through all of the details, and it didn't go well, right? Virginia has put in an enormous amount of work to get its systems right, and that this group is going to continue to refine that work. And before you do major expansions, it's smart to have those pieces in place and have a sense of, here are the key elements of a successful system. Here's the trajectory we want to be on. So that's great. And that's a terrific base to build on. I often talk about what I call aggressive incrementalism, and it's probably time, right, in Virginia to start being aggressive about growing the system incrementally. But and I will say I've been working with Virginia long enough that when I started, I didn't need readers, and now I do. But that you have done so much, and I'm excited to talk about what comes next. One of the things that's also interesting, as you heard about some of the research, that the research on child development and the interaction between children and adults, like, there is a colossal body of research on that, and does show that these first 5 years of life are absolutely critical. What's less certain is how to build state systems that maximize the number of those interactions and support the providers that do it. That's actually very contextual. And so different states have done different things. And as Amy said, like, there are some great lessons you can borrow from other states, both positive and negative. I'm going to focus on the positive. About how might you go about that, and then also put that in the Virginia context. So, I mean, one of the things I want to say at the outset is that one of the areas where I think Virginia has really been a national leader is in thinking about the importance of local and regional capacity, right? And that in this state, there's a recognition that with one-term limits in governor's offices, there's going to be turnover at the state level, and that you need a certain amount of local infrastructure that can be built up to survive any political changes at the state level. And PS, also, there's a lot of decisions in the early childhood system that should be made closer to the community level, right? That should be made by people who are interacting with parents every day, and not made in a distant state capital. So that commitment and principle that's run through Virginia's work is key, and is underlaid by a belief that the state has to be a supporter of that, to make sure, not all communities have the same resources, and how do you make sure that the communities with the greatest need are supported in their critical work. part of that is data. And I think part of why Amy and I gravitated toward each other very early in my career as an education policy consultant is we both believe in data, and we believe in data because we believe in change, right? No one is here because they're like, well, the early childhood system in Virginia is perfect as it is. I'm here to preserve the status quo, right? You're all here because you want to change, but you can't make intelligent change if you don't have a crisp handle on what's going on right now. And that's why Virginia's work to build its data infrastructure is so critical. Early childhood is a very complicated ecosystem. You've got pre-K, you've got childcare, you've got Head Start. Some of it is state funded, some of it is totally private, some of it is a mix of the two. And to understand that dynamic ecosystem really does require a commitment to data and analytics that honestly most states to date have not really shown. I will add, and Delegate Coiner talked about some of the challenges with the workforce. That's another area where you need to have really good data to understand what exactly is happening, right? If people are leaving the workforce, there are probably good reasons. What are they and how do you get at them to address them? So that is something that Virginia has really been working on. A couple of states I'll highlight in this area are Georgia, which has a Department of Early Care and Learning that has its own research team and that has put out some really great research reports that have then driven activity. And also Kentucky, the Kentucky Center for Statistics is broader than early childhood, but has a lot of analytic capacity and does work in early childhood. So again, and I know there's some nascent work in Iowa that's really exciting. So those are some of the states that I think of as real leaders in using data to drive improvement, which again, whatever policy choices you're making is sort of a core value. Amy also talked about the important connection with K-12 schools, right? Like in early childhood, the vast majority of children who experience the birth to 5 years in Virginia will then go on to be part of the Virginia education system. And, you know, as Delegate Coiner pointed out, learning is cumulative, right? You start at the beginning, and if you start at 5, it really is too late. If you look at the data from K-12 schools around the country, that maybe 1 in 6 school districts can take a cohort of kids that is a year behind at the end of 2nd grade and get them caught up by the end of high school, right? That suggests that even if we got every school in Virginia to be at a level of producing student growth that would make it elite by national standards, it still wouldn't be enough to achieve your high school goals if you haven't also addressed the early childhood piece. You all know that intuitively, but one of the things that's important to think about is what does that mean for the relationship between early childhood and K-12, right? Because there are some number of K-12 leaders who do a great job of thinking holistically about early childhood systems. They understand the importance of kindergarten readiness. They partner effectively. They deliver quality services. And there are other K-12 leaders I've met who, for lack of a better term, seem to really believe that children are born at the age of 5, right? That is not how it works. All of you who are parents are keenly aware. So thinking about how do you build the capacity of school district leaders is really a key part of thinking about, again, the system you ultimately want to have as well. A number of folks have pointed out the importance of paying attention to family demand and building supply, right? Really important to have good choices for families. Families they care about location, they care about hours, they care about transport, how are I'm going to get my kid there? How is that going to support my ability to work? How is it going to support their development? Do they have a relationship with the person? And they care about quality, right? Historically, they have not focused on state quality ratings as much, but that building state quality ratings to the point where they are meaningful is a key part of this conversation. But it's also the case, and again, a number of the stories you've heard speak to this, that helping families navigate this complicated system is a real key piece of infrastructure, right? Who has less bandwidth than the parents of a newborn who are in a low-income family, right? That is all the markers. And so the fact that at that moment, they're like, oh, now I have to go find some arrangement for my kids so I can work. And there's all these different providers and I don't know what they do and I don't know how this all fit, like whether I can afford it. Like that is a process where helping families out is really key. Something that I know, a lot of folks here have paid a lot of attention to. South Carolina is a state that lately has been getting a lot of national attention for some of the work they've done in that area. But again, a lot of that happens locally, but how can the state support increased infrastructure to make those local connections? And then there's the economics part of it, right? A number of people have touched on that. How do you make this system work for private providers and for families, right? Again, people often compare the cost of early childhood to the cost of college tuition. I think there's going to be a slide you're going to see on that later today. Those slides are really telling, but it's also important to remember that if you look at graphs of sort of how people's earnings grow over time, as you'd expect, most people make more money later in their career, right? So they are sending their kid to college when their salaries have potentially been growing for 18 years since they needed infant toddler care. Moreover, they've probably been saving for it, right? So when you think about the economics and you look at the comparison, layer over that the fact that the ability to pay for families of young children is that much less than it is for older children. And so that's a key thing to think about too. And again, as Secretary Godero pointed out, Virginia's economy is thriving, right? Like you are building businesses, people are moving here, people want to be in the workforce, but they can't be in the workforce unless they have those childcare supports. This does come down to paying for it on some level, right? Like, and you can't snap your fingers and just sort of make this all happen. And so in thinking about building your workforce and building the supply of providers, again, being thoughtful and thorough is so critical, because if there is any hole in the balloon, the air is going to leak out, right? And that the folks who work, the national experts I talk to about workforce development in early childhood emphasize, like, professional development matters, preparation matters, work conditions matter, salary matters. All of it also matters together. And if there's any one part of that that you haven't covered, that will be the thing that kills the rest of your efforts. So again, the holistic approach that you're taking, and this commission is really an important part of it. And it's also important to note, one of the things I used to joke about when I started in early childhood advocacy, back when pterodactyls flew in the skies, that one of the problems we kept having was every year was year one, right? We'd come up with these multi-year plans for improvement and we'd do stuff, and the next year it felt like we were starting over, right? What's exciting about Virginia is that for several years now, you've really been on a path, and that path cut across gubernatorial administrations and has a chance to continue and has a lot of the key pieces you need, right? The local infrastructure, the focus on quality. And again, the focus on quality in Virginia, and this is something that Jenna and I have bonded about for many, many years, is not like, there are a lot of states that have a definition of quality that's essentially made up, right? They take a lot of indicators that may or may not have anything to do with the child experience, and they throw it into a formula and they say, well, if you're doing well on this, we'll call that quality. For the children and the families, what matters is the actual interaction and the actual experience that they're having. And PS, all the research shows that's what matters to their long-term outcomes too. So the fact that Virginia has really kept that focus at the heart of its work is so critical. And again, you can't lose that as you go forward. I think the important thing I want to wrap up by saying is that Virginia just has so much to build on, and you're at such a great moment to move forward. So as I look from national perspective, I see so much opportunity here, and there have been a number of states this year that have made big, bold investments in early childhood, right? I mean, Missouri has done that, Minnesota's doing it, where I live, Illinois is doing it, and there are others. So you have a chance to be part of a growing national movement. You've been very thoughtful to this point, and I'm just excited to be here to try to help you be thoughtful about it as you go forward in the rest of the day. Does that cover it for the moment? Great. So now I think we're going to hear from Jenna.
I want to just encourage everyone to stand up. I know we just talked to you a lot. Grab coffee, grab water while Jenna's coming up, and keep writing notes, and then the chats too. So thank you to everybody, and thanks, Elliot. Thanks, Madam Chair. And we'll now get a sense of a state of early childhood, the system here in Virginia. So thank you.
All right. Should we start to sit? We've got folks coming back. We've got folks in Dominican Republic, Maine, Florida, hopefully also enjoying delicious lunches. I'm going to go ahead and get us started for the afternoon session. I'm Jenna Conway. I am the Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education. I've worked for more than a decade in both the Commonwealth as well as in Louisiana at the state level to help bring together early childhood public-private systems and in the goal of achieving better outcomes for kids. Wanted to thank our partners at the Early Childhood Foundation, thank everybody in the room, thank our practitioners and parents in particular. And I'm really excited to spend the next 45 minutes or so walking you through what we know about the Virginia landscape. We heard some incredible insights from Elliot and Amy and Delegate Coiner this morning, and then grounding you in what we know about Virginia's public-private system as of today, as of July of 2023, where some gaps are as you start to think about, okay, where do we go from here, and begin some of that work this afternoon. I will ask you, I know we've got food on the table and it looks delicious. I know we've got things going on for those of you who are coming in via Zoom, but we need more Post-it notes. We need to hear from you. So really encouraging as you hear what the strengths are, what are the things that are making Virginia best in class and that we want to build on. And then where are the gaps? And we don't want this session to just be folks talking at you, but we want to kind of capture from you what resonates, what sticks, what's powerful, and you want to build on. And then again, what are the gaps? Can folks on the phone hear me? It looks like everybody's on mute. Can I just get a thumbs up if they can hear? Let me make sure. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I'll get both of them. All right, let's move to the next slide, please. So what we'll cover in this 45 minutes, and I should also note your slides are in here. These are data-rich slides. For those of you whose love language is data and information, you will appreciate that. For those of you who didn't love those classes midday in school, luckily you now have food. I was nervous I was going to be the presentation before lunch. This might be a bit much, but you should have received them electronically for those of you on Zoom, and you've got them in front of you in case you would like some detail. Similar to Secretary Gadara, I want this to be interactive. So if there are questions, please don't hesitate to either raise your Zoom hand or raise your actual hand, and we can take questions as we go. But I'll cover school readiness, what we know about how many kids in the Commonwealth have the opportunity to come to school ready. We'll talk about our public-private parent choice system, ground you in how it works today, some of the key aspects of that. I'll then give you 7 reasons why we think Virginia's system is on its way, if not already best in class, some of the aspects you heard Secretary Gadara and Elliot speak to, and then I'll lay out some of the opportunities and challenges ahead. Next slide, please. And we believe here in Virginia, and also so you start to hear throughout this presentation some of the values that are embedded in this content. And one is the importance of school readiness. And I won't belabor that point as we've heard about this morning, but it is really important that we put kids in the Commonwealth on track for success. One of the strengths of Virginia, and this is really thanks to some important work by one of our private partners, E3 or Elevate Early Education, is that Virginia has in the last 5 years fully implemented a statewide kindergarten readiness system known as Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program. This note from Karen. This is VKRP, and it means we have an apples to apples comparison of what we know about all kids coming into public school at the beginning and end of kindergarten year. These are not different assessments. This is the same assessment statewide. We look at early literacy, we look at early math, we look at social skills, and we look at self-regulation. What we know based on last fall's data is just over half, 60% of kids in the Commonwealth have the opportunity to come in ready. 40% of kids are coming in behind in at least one of these 4 areas: literacy, math, self-regulation, or social skills. You'll see from the subcharts here. So the first chart is the overall 60 ready, 40% not ready. And then you see in the subcharts that we have higher areas of not readiness in literacy and math. And we've really seen some of these setbacks coming as a result of the pandemic. But the key takeaway here is 6 out of 10 kids across the Commonwealth are coming in ready, and 4 out of 10 kids are coming in not ready in at least one area. Next slide, please. We also know that when we break this data down further, that when we think about, and I'll talk later about why early childhood matters so much, it particularly matters for certain groups that have students who have historically faced barriers. And so this presents the same data, but again, looks at these specific subpopulations. So again, overall, 60% of kids are coming to school ready. But if you look at our Black students, it drops to 48%. Our Hispanic students, 40%. Low-income students, only 44% of them are coming in ready. Our multilingual or dual language learners, only a third. Only 1 in 3 of them are coming to school ready. 2/3 are not. And our students with special needs, just over 36% of them are coming in ready. So across the board, although we've made significant progress and 60% of kids are coming in ready, we know when we look at these specific subpopulations, we need to make sure that we're targeting early childhood experiences, high quality early childhood experiences for those kids. Next slide, please. This slide, let me explain what this shares, but I often talk with folks and they say, oh, what's the data? I'll say 60% of kids ready, 40% are ready. And they say, okay, but I'm sure that's not happening in my district or my community. I'm sure in my community, 90% of the kids are ready. And it must be other communities. So I share this not to create cross-region competition, but just to say that this is a persistent challenge statewide. So the blue dots are the overall amount of kids ready by region. So for example, with Southwest, 58% of kids in Southwest are coming in ready. The orange dots then look at your low income students. And so if you see, again, using Southwest as an example, not to shout out Travis and Ty, but 51% of those children who are low income are coming in ready. So you see a couple of important trends here. One is this is not just limited to one region. Across the state, we face challenges around school readiness, and you'll see some variability, but pretty consistent for all kids, somewhere between 63% and 56%. Across the state, no matter where you go, you do see that our low income students are coming in significantly less ready. And then you see some interesting trends, like, so for example, although the capital area kids overall are coming in more ready, that they're low income kids in the capital area sort of come in the least ready in the state, right? So really tackling overall readiness, how do we make sure that all kids have the opportunity to come to school ready, but also looking specifically at some of these subgroups and how those trends play out across the state. So moving to the next slide, please. Let's talk about why this matters. Yes. Yep.
Reason why you think that the capital region is the most stratified between two groups?
That's great. So that capital region is actually the U.S. capital region. So that's actually NOVA. Yes, that's your. Yes, it is. It is, and I think we can certainly break that down further. I will say that if you look at some of the other trends, like, so for example, areas that have potentially a larger number of English language learners may face some more challenges, particularly if those English language learners are also in low income subgroups. When you think about kind of combining what I shared on the prior slide in terms of some of the groups, but we know areas that have larger number of children with special needs, larger number of low income families, larger. Okay. Excellent. Great question. So to the senator's point, so why does this matter? Why should we care about whether it's the stratification or the highs or the lows? What is the connection between school readiness and making sure that Virginia is, as Secretary Gadara noted, the best place to live, work, and raise a family? I'm going to take the next couple of slides to really connect for you the dots between what you heard this morning, what we know about Virginia, and why this matters. So, this is a set of images around the human brain and development from when you're a teensy baby, as we saw with baby Emma this morning, to a 5-year-old. And it is a key period of brain development. It's rapid brain development. It's obviously a significant portion of brain development, but most importantly, it really lays the foundation. So I don't want you just to think of school readiness of do our children know their letters, know some numbers, can they share? I want you to think of that as a proxy for the foundation of the house of their lifetime outcomes. I think that's really, really important, because someone's like, well, if I teach a kid some letters or numbers at 2 weeks before kindergarten starts, can we get better school readiness? Maybe you'll get a short-term gain there, but when you think about the foundational elements of academic, cognitive, social, emotional, and physical skills, that truly takes 5 years to get there. And that's in part why school readiness matters so much. Next slide, please. Here's an example of this when you think about, to the point of delegates Coiner's talking about early literacy. You can take it all the way back to before they can talk, not to mention even close to being able to read. But we can see in babies and in sort of whether it's the MRIs or the scans of their brains or testing and sort of research with babies that they start to hear and link language to cognitive abilities as early as 3 months. We know that we sort of then measure language, even basic words and basic gestures, waving, mama, dada, that we start to see gaps in vocabulary, particularly between more affluent families and low-income families as early as 18 months. We actually are, when we start to capture vocabulary, we start to see significant difference in vocabulary. And that sort of really speaks to how many words have you heard and understand and the content, right? Words are not just abstract combinations of letters, but what the content and the cognitive skills that you have around that, and that they predict more so than anything else, kind of 3rd and 4th grade reading comprehension. And then when you want to know how many of your kids are going to graduate, you can actually track it all the way back to 3rd grade. And so it's really important. Why should we care about school readiness in early childhood? It connects all the way back to the foundational skills that will make or break a child's ability to maximize their potential. Next slide, please. I will give you this in terms of Virginia data. And let me explain this slide to you. So we took all the kids, not we, the collective we, UVA researchers and professors took all the kids that came in to kindergarten and broke their PAL scores, so their literacy scores, into sort of 5 groups. And then they looked at how they did in 3rd grade. So you're sort of the top group, the gray bar here. If you scored in the top percentage of coming into kindergarten, beginning of kindergarten on our literacy screener, over 92% of those kids reading on 3rd grade. And then you see it kind of stair step downwards from here. There's a couple of key takeaways from this information. The first of which is if we can get you coming in and in a very ready position, we know that 9 out of 10 of you, we can get you to reading on 3rd grade, right? Very positive takeaway. On the flip side, if you come in significantly behind, look at that yellow bar, as Elliot alluded to earlier, it means that we will do everything we can do in K3, and yet fewer than half of you will be reading on level. And so our real challenge is how do we get those kids who are in the yellow and orange range coming into kindergarten? We can't just do that with a couple of weeks before summer. That takes that sort of that full 5 years back. If we can get them to look like the blue and the gray, we know it will change 3rd grade outcomes. And we know that will connect to sort of high school graduation, college, career, and beyond. And this is actual Virginia data. This is just not sort of hypothetical national data, but actual Virginia data. Next slide, please. We also know from the extensive national data that this is linked to better life outcomes. And I think about sort of my colleagues like Todd and Edmund and others who are thinking about sort of their workforce. They need folks who are going to build ships, who have really strong social emotional skills, who can persist at a task, who can be curious, right? Who not only have the key literacy and numeracy skills, but the whole package. And we see that, right? We see lower rates of criminal justice involvement, higher rates of employment, employability, which is really important for our big employers as well as the US military when you have participated in high quality early childhood. We know that the academic outcomes are there. You're less likely to be retained a grade, less likely to be placed into special education, more likely to graduate and go into higher ed. And we also see, as Dr. Avula noted too, we see health issues related to this, right? Whether it's fewer adverse early childhood experiences, fewer health issues, lower rates of alcohol and tobacco use, lower rates of teen pregnancy, all that tie back to this foundational brain development that occurs in the first 5 years. Next slide, please. We know, and this is important across our public-private system, and I'll talk more about this, but just to put some other data in front of you, when we look at which are the kids that are least likely to come to school ready, it is truly our kids. The lowest number that we see is our kids from low-income backgrounds whose parents report no preschool experience whatsoever. And I want to emphasize this because I'm about to share some slides about the range of preschool programs. And you heard when people introduced themselves, we heard about BPI and early childhood special education, private programs, faith-based programs. We know that across those programs, they're having impact, right? Doesn't matter the name on the outside of the building or the funding source. When we can get kids into early childhood experiences across our diverse program, it makes a difference. And in fact, the kids that look worst coming into Virginia kindergarten classrooms across the board are children from low-income backgrounds whose parents report no preschool experience whatsoever. No Head Start, no faith-based, no family day home, no VPI, none of those things. And that is the charge of this group, is how do we make sure that every family in the Commonwealth that needs it has access to an opportunity to put their kid on track for success. Next slide, please. So we also heard this morning, and Secretary Gadara shared her story about this, but the importance of recognizing the role of families. And in Virginia, we believe that parents remain children's first and most important teachers. But there's also a trend that has been happening in the Commonwealth and really across the nation. When you look at the number or the percentage of children under the age of 6 who have all available parents in the workforce, it continues to grow very significantly. If this looks at the last decade, right now in the Commonwealth, 2 out of 3 Virginia children under the age of 6 have all available parents in the workforce. We do not believe that this should be compulsory. It should always be a choice, but we also need to recognize when we think about family demand that that's shifting over time. More families either want to or need to have all available parents in the workforce. And this is reflective both of 2-parent households as well as single parent households, but 2 out of 3 children, and this is significantly higher, right? We were about 65%, or sorry, excuse me, lower than that just a few years ago. And so this is an up sort of take in terms of the number of families for which early childhood has to be available. It needs to be healthy and safe and quality, because those parents need to work. Next slide, please. We also know that there's a connection between having access to childcare in the Commonwealth and what we're seeing in terms of our positive economy. So you heard Elliot talking about, we have historic unemployment. We've seen significant growth in our GDP. We're always first or second in terms of states that are best to do business in. And we see in recent data going back really to the pandemic that there's a pretty strong correlation between us serving more kids in our publicly funded childcare system and our unemployment rates. And you sort of see the orange line shows the growth overall in kids participating in our early child care and education system. And then the dotted line kind of gives you the trajectory of unemployment across the state. And so really sort of the connections are here. We know 2/3 of kids are in families that need access to childcare. And we also see a strong relationship between that access and unemployment in Virginia. Next slide, please. Here's another way to share it. I hope that Senator Suderline does not have questions on this, because this is where my research limitations will be made abundantly clear, but we also see that there's a correlation. I'll use the data terms here, a strong positive and statistically significant correlation between early childhood enrollment and employment in Virginia. And what this means, if you look at that orange dotted line, is that communities with greater access to publicly funded early childhood care education, and I'll talk in a second, this isn't just public preschool in the schools, this is a broader quantification of all of the early childhood programming available in that community, have higher rates of employment. So again, school readiness matters not only because we know it's foundational to brain development for these individual children, but it matters for the families, right? Because 2/3 of them rely on this system, and it matters for your businesses and your economy, right? We see a direct relationship between the availability of public and private early childhood care and education and unemployment and employment, which is how families pursue greater self-sufficiency and better outcomes for them and their kids. All right, let's talk a little bit about our landscape here in early childhood. I'm going to ground you in some of the key facets of our public-private parent choice system. I'm then going to quiz you and have you say that 5 times fast. Public-private parent choice system. But really important to note, and particularly as we are now related or under the Department of Education, but to understand the distinctions between how our public-private parent choice system is distinct and unique from our K-12 system. Next slide, please. The first important piece to note, and you heard Secretary Gadara talk about this, we heard the diversity of providers, whether that was Sonia, who we were getting to zoom into the center this morning, or hearing from Rachel or Benita, but we have an incredibly diverse system. We've got nearly 2,000 family child care programs in the Commonwealth, nearly 3,000 licensed child care centers, nearly 1,000 public schools, nearly 1,000 religiously exempt child care centers, thinking about kind of Delegate Cherry's point about the importance of faith-based programs. And across those sites, we've got over 50 Head Start and early Head Start grantees. So it is truly a choice system with an array of options, different sizes, different hours, different curriculum, different sort of approaches used, which really then enables families to choose their preference for their infants, toddlers, or preschoolers. Next slide, please. Now, here, oh yes, Christian Elizabeth. Yep.
Have we looked, thank you. Have we looked at the intersection between choice and demographics? Because choice looks very different depending on where you are. And so have we broken it down to understand either geographically or socioeconomically, what does choice actually mean to individual families? Because it's usually disproportionately.
Absolutely.
more
So
choice
the
depending-
question was about choice in families. And so we look at it in a couple of ways. So we certainly have all of that data broken down to the community level in terms of both the sites, how many kids it served at different sites, and their preferences. We also charge, and I'll talk in a moment about this, our ready regions or our regional infrastructure, some of the local infrastructure that Elliot alluded to develop local systems, determine what parents' preferences are. And so kind of, as I'll talk a little bit later, sort of constantly looking at that question of choice and how do we build a system to align with the family demand. And then lastly, as I'll talk about in our research policy partnerships, we do a lot of surveys of families and to understand what their preferences are. So we know, for example, that oftentimes parents of infants and toddlers would prefer, as Secretary Gadare described earlier today, a smaller setting, right? And might be more comfortable with a school-based setting for preschool, but I don't think many people would say, let me send my baby to the elementary school, right? That's not a choice. We also know, for example, both in Northern Virginia and out in Southwest, that there's a real preference for family childcare, and really recognizing that as an important part of the fabric. For a while in our country, the perception was that when offered in people's homes, it was less educational, it was less professional, and that's not what parents prefer. And so in some of our populations, particularly some of our dual language populations, they would very much prefer to be in a smaller setting where the educators spoke their language. So we do, it's really important, and we're trying kind of across our system to capture that information about choice and preference. One of the things, though, to Elizabeth's point, though, I want to be really clear, is that affordability does limit choice. And so the next couple of slides, as you start to think about understanding the system, and I notice people have stopped eating, so I want to see writing. Okay, I'm looking at this table right here. I can't see what your color is, but writing down assets and gaps. So it goes without saying, the next couple of slides will basically say early childhood, which is a public-private system, which means the vast majority of the funds coming into the system right now are private dollars. It is out of reach for most families. Here's a very simple example, right, of the kind of annual median income in the Commonwealth is $80,000. You have 2 kids under the age of 5, is at least, several people have noted today, right? Elizabeth, Miss Delegate Bennett Parker, and you're looking at 40% of your income, 40% of your income pre-tax going to childcare. That's just not doable. And this is the average income, the average tuition, the average rate for infant and preschoolers. And that puts families in a really difficult, if not impossible situation, if they need to subsidize that on their own. Next slide, please. So this is a new slide we're sharing. Elliot alluded to this earlier, but just basically, you look at these incredible logos of some of our esteemed higher education institutions, and you must assume, well, gosh, the tall blue bar under Mason, it must be the cost of Mason, and the gray bar must be the cost of covering for infant, toddler, and preschool care in Northern Virginia. It's the opposite. The gray bars are actually the cost of higher ed, and the blue bars are the cost of the entire early childhood experience. And you see almost everywhere, with the exception of Southside, that we just took a sort of a typical local public university, that the cost of sending that child to college is cheaper than sending that kid through early childhood. Just a really important point to kind of make that clear, again, across the Commonwealth, that when you think about how important this is, and yet far fewer resources to support families to help kids to complete this part of their education, while there are certainly more resources for higher ed. So across the state, we can share this underlying data with you, but just a really important takeaway. And then, as Elliot noted earlier, this also happen to be points in their career where families have less resources than they do at later points in their career. Next slide, please. This is putting it in words, and we've already heard this from the moms and dads in the room, but the cost of childcare is more than the mortgage, right? That I can only do this because of the public funding through childcare subsidy. And we are literally between a rock and a hard place. And when the families are struggling, as you hear in a part, then it really becomes hard for the childcare sector to be able to respond, right? And then it becomes really hard to kind of attract the educators needed. So across the board, across the Commonwealth, I'm sure our elected officials are hearing this day in, day out. It is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to figure out how to pay for early childhood. Next slide, please. So this is where the important role of public funding, and I want to sort of note this, and particularly out of hearing from our commission members like Benita, this is public funding works differently in the early childhood space. It is important. It does, to the question raised by Elizabeth, help enable choice and affordability. It enables families to choose the options across the array of settings I described earlier to meet their needs. All children are not guaranteed to be served like K-12. There's different eligibility requirements are used to prioritize. So the funds I talk about go towards families in most need, who are most benefit in need. And the public funds, and here's the really important kind of distinguishing factor about our public-private parent choice system, the public funds go to public and private settings, and a system that's designed and should be designed for an array of public and private programs, including some of our faith-based programs and diverse family preferences that Elizabeth's questions might look slightly different for infants and toddlers, might look different based on your home language, might look different based on the developmental needs of your children. What we do at the state level is try to make sure across those public and private programs that take public dollars, that there's consistent expectations for health, safety, and quality. Secretary Gadara said it earlier. I've often said before too, I didn't pay more than my mortgage for my kids just to not get hurt all day. Like, I want them to learn. It is truly early childhood care and education. And so setting consistent expectations for programs, funding them to meet those expectations and holding them accountable, coordinating enrollment to understand preferences and match supply to family demand at the regional level, and then really getting data across the system down to the classroom level to promote continual quality improvement, demonstrate impact, and support accountability. So the public funding plays a key role in this system. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is impossible to read, but this basically gives you a summary of the key publicly funded program. There are four that are listed here. The Virginia Preschool Initiative that mostly goes to schools and serves 4- and 3-year-olds. The Mixed Delivery Preschool Grant Program, which goes to private settings and also is a kind of a preschool equivalent for 3- and 4-year-olds and has begun to serve infants and toddlers. Early Head Start and Head Start, which Simon spoke about earlier, kind of really rooted in our community action agencies across the state, serves our most low income, greatest in need 3- and 4-year-olds and babies across the state. And then our child care subsidy program, which are vouchers that families use to pay for private childcare across family day homes, child care centers, faith-based programs across the state, as well as early childhood special education. And this chart you've got in your notes gives you the detail on the diversity of these programs, noting across the board that we set consistent expectations to make sure that we have improvement and accountability across the board. Next slide, please. So of all of these resources, a couple of important takeaways to note are: one is that the most public funds support preschool. So this is your couple of different programs: Early Head Start, Child Care Subsidy, Virginia Preschool, and Mixed Delivery. And you'll see that overall, about 64% of our public dollars support 3- to 5-year-olds. 20%, and this is growing, support infants and toddlers, and 16% support school-age children. So this is really for those kids who need before and after care because mom or dad are working. This is sort of key to notes. You'll see those are the big investments. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see where the gaps are. And so here you see that on the one hand, while we've made a lot of progress in Virginia with 4-year-olds, that we still, about half of eligible preschoolers in Virginia lack access to publicly funded preschool. And the vast majority of this bar, which is the, jumping around a little bit. Can we go back a few slides there? Let's get back one more. Forward one. All right, hopefully we're not going to get over one more, please. So you look at the orange bar here. So the blue sort of the preschoolers, we have just under 45,000 preschoolers served, leaving a gap of 3s and 4s. It's about 80,000. So work to be done there. And then if you look at infants and toddlers, we're serving just under 15,000 infants and toddlers with public funds. If you were to total all of the kids that could be in need, that goes up to about 140,000. So a very significant gap in unmet need, sort of 90% of eligible infants and toddlers lacking access right now. Before experiencing sticker shock to those numbers, I want to I'll share in slides to come about how we are growing the system in response to parent demand, so that it's not just like, oh, tomorrow we need to have resources to serve 140,000 more kids, but instead prudently growing to kind of address the actual need of the families of infants and toddlers as we go. But really important to know that if you've heard, for those of you who are elected officials, from the parents of infants and toddlers that in your community that they're struggling to find care, that makes sense when you think about some of the unmet need out there. Next slide, please. And so this is a simple way of thinking about it. For every child in the Commonwealth birth to 5 who've served in a publicly funded birth to 5 slot, there are 3 children, infants, toddlers, or preschooler, who are lacking access. So again, we've made a ton of progress, but there's a lot of work to be done. Yes, Ashley.
Quick question, does lacking access mean affording care, or does it also include, maybe a family who can but can't find a place for their child to go? Because when I look at that infant number in particular, I'm thinking a lot about many programs do not take infants. A lot of them won't start till 2 years old. And so is access here cost, or is access also, we don't have programs for children to go in, period?
So that graph represents the folks who would be eligible, roughly up to about 400% of the federal poverty level. So already families who would likely struggle to pay 40% of their income if there were slots available. Those things are interrelated though, right? What you do happen to find is if their families are struggling to pay, then there's often not a marketplace, right? There's not supply there. And so they track very closely. So it starts with what families would not be able to afford it, but then very closely related is, okay, how many slots are available? And then, as I'll talk in a bit later, how many educators are available? Because a new-ish trend in Virginia since the pandemic and some of the workforce challenges has been, we might have the physical space of the infant classroom, but you might not be able to find infant teachers. Great question. All right, next slide. And I love all the chats coming in. Okay, so you've got a sense of the landscape. You understand why school readiness matters. Let's talk about 7 factors that make Virginia best in class. I'm going to move through this with some speed because I know I want to get to sort of your ideas and hearing from you. So let's move to the next slide, please. There will be a pop quiz afterwards. You'll need to write down all 7. I'm just kidding. See if you're awake. But kind of a really important thing is when Elliot described kind of how do we look across the national landscape and say, here are the things that we should invest and build further in. So number 1, we've got dynamic public-private partnerships. You heard from this commission how important that is. Number 2, we've got bipartisan and business support. Number 3, we've got a nation-leading quality measurement and improvement system with robust data infrastructure. We've established in the recent years the regional infrastructure. We've got data-driven decision-making happening at each level of the system. We're tackling, although still work to be done. Please note this in your gap section, the workforce challenges, and we've got family demand driving record participation in Virginia. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the public-private foundation, really important. And I know we heard from some members this morning about how key it was that we build this and design this to meet the needs of the public-private partnerships that exist across the state. Next slide, please. As you look over this slide, you'll see kind of our origin story, and each aspect of this has involved a key set of business, public, and private partners, and that's really key. We've come a long way in recent years, from passing a law to unify early childhood, receiving federal grants, setting up organizations. We've got groups like the Early Childhood Foundation, like the Ready Regions that truly reflect public-private partnerships at the state, regional, and local level. We've got joint commissions and subcommittees that engage our delegates and senators. And now we're kicking off this commission with another key important this year, starting our statewide measurement and improvement system. So a very strong foundation. I can't remember who said it earlier, but I think it was Elizabeth, this idea of sustaining this while also tackling the gaps that you'll see in a second. Next slide, please. We've got bipartisan, one more, bipartisan business support. I won't read the slides on this, but I'm just going to cite, and I heard Delegate Coiner noted earlier, 75% of employers, 75% of Virginia employers say it's important that the state invest and support and invest in childcare. And nearly 80% of voters, including Republicans and Democrats, say it's extremely or very important for elected officials to take action to make childcare more affordable and accessible. I thought about our parent representative, Ms. Frazier's comments earlier about how do we sort of take some of this information today and begin to take action, and our voters want that as well. I also just want to note that it's been bipartisan efforts in the General Assembly that helped us make progress in recent years, and even our chamber and our counties and our businesses have supported and made early childhood a priority for the business sector in addition to the public sector. Next slide, please. All right, we've got a nation leading, we can go one more, Angela. We've got a nation leading quality measurement and improvement system. There's entire presentations on this, but the high level is just to emphasize what Elliot made earlier, is that we have built out over the last few years a statewide system that captures down to the classroom level what kids are experiencing, adult-child interactions, which 200 data studies across the country show that those are most strongly linked to child outcomes. This fall, all of our publicly funded birth to 5 programs will be required to participate, which means we will look into, have insight into classrooms across 3,600 school, family childcare, faith-based sites with 12,000 classrooms. And I put classrooms in quotes, right? Because we look at Sonia's home this morning, that's also her classroom and her home. And this data that we will capture, I'll share in a moment why it will be so impactful, but it suggests even so far in this rolling out that we are already seeing improvements in interactions using high quality curriculum. And we're seeing the greatest improvement in the private sector, in our family day homes and childcare. So again, VQB5, we believe, is a nation leading accountability system that is inclusive of the public-private partners. Next slide, please. Regional infrastructure. This is also really important. And you heard Elliot speak about this morning. It's important that we here in Richmond make the policy and practice decisions that support the work happening locally. I believe the words that Elliot used were some of these decisions need to be made closest to educators, to business leaders, to families, and to children. And so Virginia has built out in partnership with the Early Childhood Foundation and private entities across the Commonwealth, the READY regions, and they will play a key role in making sure we can build out VQB5 statewide, making sure, to Elizabeth's questions, we can capture family preferences and design the options that work for them in the community. So we're engaging families in each of those areas, helping us coordinate enrollment. We heard Simon talk earlier about maximizing enrollment and helping us support improvement across the public and private sector. They are key, and as you see from this map, established in every corner of the state, helping us to truly achieve statewide scale and positioning us well for any future investment and growth. Next slide, please. These are the ones for Secretary. I think I had to step out, but I know these are her favorite slides. We'll go one more, Angela. Data-driven decision-making. So really important as we've built out with VQB5, with the READY regions, we've built out the infrastructure to get into every classroom. This is key. This will ultimately allow us to understand what is making the biggest difference for children across our 12,000 classrooms and to support improvement while also measuring return on investment and what we're getting. So basically we capture where kids are being served down to the classroom level. We know a lot of information about that classroom, what's happening in that classroom, what's the credentials of that teacher, how much is she or he paid, what's the turnover rate, what curriculum is used. And then we have that at scale across the public and private system, which then we're able to look at when you marry that then to the VKRP data and other data to understand which programs are helping kids grow and how do we leverage that, share that, and grow that. Where do we need to provide more support to programs, right? Where do we, to Ashley's point, say we don't have enough programs, right? And then if we bring on new programs, how do we make sure that there's sufficient quality so parents would truly choose those and stay there, right? It's not just about having a place where your child won't get harmed. So we're building out this system, which is known as LinkB5, and then able to connect it to our longitudinal data system. So as Delegate Coiner alluded to, we can understand over time the power and impact of these investments. Next slide, please. This is a visual way of thinking about this, but basically we've got folks at every site, educators, observers of classrooms, entering the data into Link V5, a comprehensive set of data, which then allows us to understand what's happening across our program, to make sure that there is accountability for performance, to look at what we know about the workforce and the challenges facing the workforce in a data-driven way, and then use that to shape guidelines, policy, to make sure that we're getting resources and make sure that we're getting things that work for educators like Recognize V5 supported. There's also an appendix slide in your content that really shows how we connect it to all the longitudinal data. So third grade SOLs and high school graduation, but really important, we understand when kids are coming into our system, what they're experiencing, and then how that translates into short-term school readiness, success, and longer-term life outcomes. Next slide, please. If that's not enough, we've also really doubled down on research policy partnerships to make sure with our public and private partners that we're using different forms of data to develop and continually evolve our system. So we've, as a collaborative, have published 25 more briefs that really detail about the workforce, about the challenges that families with special needs face, that kind of every part of this. We've received more than 3 rounds of competitive federal funding based on these public-private partnerships with VCF and UVA. And we use these resources to survey families, educators, and leaders, as well as to test innovations. We're right now using some of those funds. We're developing a statewide needs assessment for each of our unique ready regions to make sure that it's not just at the state level that I can share data with you, but like no matter where you go in the state, that a regional equivalent of a leader, public or private, could use this data to shape regional decision-making. And then we're trying to figure out on the back end, as Delegate Coiner noted, how do we connect all these systems so you can truly say, whether it's families, elected officials, school leaders, school boards, or others, how do you present the pathway of kids' experiences, education as the great lever for opportunity in the Commonwealth, and ultimately, hopefully, present the type of data that could attract folks to come and say, I want to work at a company in Newport News, in Richmond, because I understand if my kids come to the Commonwealth, they will be have the opportunity to get onto this pathway, that we have a clear picture of how it puts kids on track for success. Next slide, please. All right, a couple more, and then I'm going to wrap up here and get to you all. So I want to also emphasize the importance of innovation. If we go to the next slide, you've heard from our leaders, from our teachers, like Ms. Stacy, about the real challenges of the workforce. And we recognize that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but also know that we are really trying to sort of use creative thinking and outside funding to address some of these challenges. If we can go to the next slide, please. You'll see here a couple of things to highlight. I think the first is to understand that there's a direct relationship between how we fund our programs and how educators are compensated. And basically, if the state underpays the rate it provides to private providers, teachers will get paid less. We have a ton of evidence that shows that. And so we've shifted models, thanks to the General Assembly adopting in its budget 2 years ago, to sort of saying we need a cost-based approach or methodology. We are one of only 3 in the country, 3 states or districts that have done that, begun to implement that last fall. We have prioritized expanding slots in our private settings. When you think about all the growth that I've described to you, the vast majority of that has been in private settings. We've recognized wait lists, to the points made by Ashley earlier, really as important barometers or measures of unmet family demand, and really thinking about, okay, how do we address that? If that is because there are not enough teachers, how do we think about what is holding back our private providers and seek to address that? We've piloted and scaled an innovative childcare educator incentive, and we've most recently piloted Fast Track in several areas of the state, noting that many of our candidates do not come through a traditional 4-year educational opportunity, often start at places like Reynolds. How do we bring on new educators, address the challenges that the private providers are facing, support increasing retention, and providing competitive compensation? So really important that we recognize that innovating in the space of workforce and compensation is going to be key for Virginia as we go forward. Next slide, please. This is highlights recognize B5. So those of you who may not be familiar with this, but we have created a unique Virginia incentive. We tested this or piloted this in Fairfax, saw that it cut turnover in half, simply providing at the time $1,500 to childcare and family childcare educators. It did not have an effect on school-based teachers. And so after that pilot and test, we've limited it just to family childcare and childcare. And now we've grown it up to $3,000 per educator. And as you see with these numbers across the state, thousands, nearly 12,000 statewide of childcare and early childhood educators are benefiting. And though we still face challenges in terms of turnover, we think Recognize B5 plays a key role in ensuring some stability during these incredibly difficult times for the private sector. Next slide, please. All right. The key and I think most important of our best in class factors here is if your system is truly best in class, it should be attracting more families and more people should want to be a part of that system. In the next slides, I'll show that that's exactly what's happening here in the Commonwealth. And so this chart shows the Virginia children served per year across all of our publicly funded programs. You see, as we saw, heard and saw everywhere in the country, we saw significant drops in programs during the pandemic. But we have recovered and then some. And so overall, and this is across all of our private and publicly funded programs, we've seen a 41% increase in enrollment compared to pre-pandemic. 41%. You've heard nationally that we have fewer kids in K-12. You've heard nationally more that folks have sort of opted out of this. That is not true for a public-private early childhood system in Virginia. We are serving 41% more kids, and the vast majority of that growth has been in the private sector. Next slide, please. This is across the state. So these charts just show mixed delivery and childcare subsidies. So this is all growth in the private sector, publicly funded private early childhood from Southwest to Capital to Southeastern. The blue bars represent where we were in terms of the kids served with public dollars in private settings in 2019. And you see 100% growth in Southwest, 75% growth in the West, 109% growth in Central, 121% growth in South Side. Across the board, the orange bar in many cases is twice as big as the blue bar. All private sector growth, family childcare, faith-based, through mixed delivery and childcare subsidy, driven by family demand in really since 2019 or the pre-pandemic. So you hear the story of like, oh, well, since the pandemic, families have left. That is not true. And that is not true in our public-private choice system here in the Commonwealth. And you see that trend is pervasive across all of your regions. Next slide, please. We also know that this is really key when you think about the sort of some of the groups we've talked about today. So when I heard Stacy talking about 3-year-olds, we didn't serve 3-year-olds in BPI 4 years ago. And now gradually we've grown up to nearly 4,000 3-year-olds served in BPI. We're serving far more infants and toddlers in our private settings, early Head Start, mixed delivery and childcare subsidy. And for those of you representing rural areas, we're seeing 51% more children participating in publicly funded programs in our rural communities. So it's not just in our urban areas, it's across the board. The vast majority of this growth in private sector programs that are really trying to respond to the unique demand of families. Next slide, please. And this is also important in terms of if you're building a best in class system, will the providers be willing to take public funds? And this is key. It is always a choice. We will always have some early childhood providers who want to be entirely private, and that is understandable in the same way that we have private K-12 schools. However, we are seeing, even as we raise expectation for public fund programs, because we're funding them or working to fund them to meet expectations, you see that overall more publicly funded, more programs are willing to take public dollars in the private sector. And our capacity to serve publicly funded children has gone from just under 170,000 children to over 200,000 children as of this year. Okay, so 7 assets. We've got public-private foundation. We have built out a high quality measurement and improvement system. We have a data infrastructure to match and a regional infrastructure as well. We know we've got bipartisan and business support. We know we're working to address some of the workforce challenges. And we know that in Virginia, that the system we've been building has become increasingly appealing, both to private providers as part of this public-private parent choice system, and most importantly to families, the families of infants and toddlers and preschoolers. So with that, I just want to wrap with some of the key challenges I think you should be aware of as we move forward. Yes, we think we're building one of the nation's preeminent systems, but there's still challenges that remain. Next slide, please. The first challenge is that as the system grows, the current trajectory of growth really suggests that the family demand for public-private early childhood will soon exceed available federal funding. So this is really important. As we have designed systems to meet families' preferences, more and more families, again, we're still talking about families who are in need, so low income or otherwise at-risk families, more families are demanding this care. A part of that's because we've got more families in the workforce and historic unemployment, and part of that because the system has been responding to the needs and preferences of families. So this orange chart gives you a sense if we kind of kept the same rate of growth, kind of how we would continue to see this family demand grow across. As I shared in the previous slides, you can reasonably assume that this would be across the state. So this is not driven just by one area of the state. It is truly across the state. Next slide, please. We know that, and Ashley sort of somehow predicted this coming, but we know that we're sort of constantly looking at, well, what, as you look at that demand curve, what would we need to do on the supply side, and what are the factors that are holding us back? And right now, what we are hearing loud and clear, we heard from some private providers this morning on this, is that workforce shortages continue to really limit supply. And so Delegate Coiner cited some of these statistics, but we're seeing still very high rates of turnover. Although our private providers are paying educators more, now that you account for inflation, we have tons of data that suggests that actual real wages have declined or remained stagnant due to inflation. We know that most of our private childcare teachers are not available to have benefits, and as a result, that you see them, that sites report struggling to staff classrooms. And then really both in our, this is true in our private programs as well as our public-private programs, that there are vacancies. And we have more vacancies in our publicly funded programs, that folks, 1 out of 3 are reporting that they have to close classrooms. And over half are saying we had to turn away families. We have heard of infant wait lists, even in affluent communities where the tuition is $25,000 or $28,000 a year, having hundreds of kids and families on the wait list. I was talking with Superintendent Coons, she talked about her 9-month-old. I think that baby's on like a 16-month waiting list, right? I mean, the wait lists are just off the charts. And folks would say, I could probably find more space. That's not the issue, right? If I'm running a top-notch program, the challenge is the staffing. How do I make sure I can bring in the resources, find the talent to make sure not only your baby is well taken care of, but is supported to thrive? That is the biggest factor limiting supply right now. And we know that it's a very difficult workforce to work in. And we see that the relationship between lower compensation, higher turnover, less stability for kids, for programs, for working families, and our educators are concerned about finance. They don't know, somewhat like half of our educators are on public assistance themselves. And that makes it very hard to do good work with babies when you're worried about just when you're where you're going to get your next meal, or you're facing hunger or other issues. Next slide, please. I also want to know, when you sort of think about, and this is, I should see you writing your gaps. This is the gap section, in case folks are noting, that not only do we know that we've got growing family demand, which is a good thing, but ultimately we may not be able to pay for it. We know we've got an interest, even more interest potentially untapped in that family demand, but we've got to address some of the workforce challenges. And I just want to put in a note about how seriously we need to take school readiness, particularly in light of coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, although you probably read the headlines that have focused on the K-12 learning setbacks or learning losses, those same trends are taking place, and we're seeing some of that same findings in early childhood. So we see that children born in the pandemic have significantly reduced verbal, motor, and overall cognitive performances. They were delayed, and when they first said mama or dada, they weren't waving at 12 months like other children were. We are seeing speech language pathologists for our 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds saying we have way more cases than we've ever had before, and kids are coming in. When kids were coming in as 3-year-olds, they look like 1-year-olds, right, instead of 3-year-olds. We are hearing, and I'm sure Ms. Parham and the Dominican Republic could attest to this. We are having 4-year-olds come in who look like 2-year-olds, right? Both in terms of the cognitive experiences that they've had, as well as the social emotional. We have unprecedented referrals for needs for sort of mental health support. We have challenges that are happening in society, right? Sort of violence and other things that are playing out in early childhood classrooms. And we know that we've seen in our early literacy result, which led to things like the Virginia Literacy Act, historic drops, really, with the sort of stunning results in the spring of 2021, that when kids did not have access, when you think about that period in the graph where participation in early childhood dropped, we saw results of that in our kids. The good part of that, it means that early childhood matters, right? That because when we that there was a loss when kids could not attend those programming, but it does mean that at this point in time, particularly, not only do we need to respond to this growing demand, but also to understand that our kids need this now more than ever. So with that, next slide, please. So as you all wrap up and you're thinking about, okay, what are the kind of the key challenges ahead, just to really start to think through, how do you come first full circle from why early childhood matters, why school readiness in the Commonwealth matters, why our public-private system is so important. If we cannot make the investments to meet family demand, what will that mean for the Commonwealth, right? It does mean this risk of fewer children having the opportunity to come to school ready. And we've got some really compelling data on that. We know that this will affect small businesses. As I said, if you think about all the charts with the upper line growth, the vast majority of those resources are going to private sector businesses and supporting working families. And so we know that if we are not able to continue these investments, that we will start to see a vicious cycle of programs not able to serve kids, and then closing down or closing classrooms. And in turn, as we heard from Secretary Gadara and all of the working parents, Delegate Coiner, if families can't access this, right, and 2/3 of them have all available parents in the workforce, then they need to opt out of the workforce, right? And then we have more families that are not part of the workforce. And then other employers find it harder to meet the talent needs to help grow the Virginia economy, the Virginia GDP. So as I wrap up here, and I see a bunch of comments coming in here, but just really, it's an incredible story of public-private partnership over the last few years. The trends look very, very good as you think about how we would grow and improve outcomes and make future investment, but we have to, as a commission, determine what we will do to address some of the key gaps that remain. With that, let me pause, and I know we're at 12:30, so let me pause and see what questions that folks may have.
We do have a couple of questions from folks in the Zoom.
Let's do that.
Delegate Bulova, would you like to unmute and ask? I had 2 questions from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me kind of go back to the first one, which gets at the readiness assessment. And so, I know that's reducing that overall 40% not coming in ready, is our primary goal. I guess the question is realizing that that's a really big thing to tackle, whether there is a relative importance to the different components. So when you're looking at, do you focus on literacy or math or self-regulation? Does it make sense to focus in on one or more of these particular areas because they set the stage for the other stuff? And so, for instance, if you focus in on self-regulation, does that then make it easier to go into literacy and math? So I'm just trying to think in terms of how do we manage this and take bites at the apple that are most meaningful?
Yeah. Delegate, that's a great question. And we probably, if we ask different people, we get different answers. I'd be very hesitant with your colleague to sort of say, for example, that the literacy or math is less important. What I would say that I don't know that we could peel off any of those 4. I think one of the things that makes Virginia's kindergarten readiness assessment so meaningful is because it does capture those 4. And I think Elliot could speak to this better than me. For a lot of our early childhood recent history across the country, we've just used early literacy as a proxy for readiness. And that's been a little short-sighted, and particularly when we focused on these tactical skills. So for example, do you know a letter? can you do a sound? And what we've realized over time is that some of those things can be taught more easily than others. And what you really want, if you're an elected official, if you're a K-12 system administrator, is to sort of have this holistic understanding, even if the numbers are a little hard to take at times, that these are kids who are sort of fully ready or not ready versus, okay, yes, we moved your knowledge of the 26 letters and the sounds, but honestly, if we haven't figured out how to help you deal with those very big 4 or 5-year-old emotions, like you're not even going to be able to pay attention on the math piece. And I should probably get Stacey Vance to weigh in on that. But I do, and this is probably not the answer you want, but I do think that those 4 areas are important, and that even though it's a little hard to take, and we'd like them to see higher, that measuring in that way helps us have more candid and honest conversations about what it would really take to get kids to be on level by 3rd grade and beyond.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And I guess the second question I had, because there's been a lot of focus in your presentation and particularly in the chat about how do we adequately fund our system, and particularly concern over, the stability of federal funding and what happens if that falls off the cliff. And so I guess looking at the current structure of our system of public funding, is there a need to re-look at that structure to make sure that that's actually being organized in an effective or efficient way? Because I know as things develop organically over time, sometimes they don't necessarily all fit together well. And so is that something that we ought to be looking at and stepping back and saying, hey, how are we structuring the funding for our public system?
That's another great question. I think that's part of the charge of this group. When you think about the financing, I think where Virginia has had success is in, recognizing it's a public-private parent choice system. I think working really closely in recent years to say, okay, what do we expect of the private and public providers that take public dollars, and starting to align? Like if we expect this level of performance, how do we fund programs to do it? And so that was a very big and important step by the General Assembly to require us at the department to do that methodology, and so that we're now funding programs to be successful. What we're seeing though is as we fund programs to be successful, drive better outcomes for kids, that families want more of that, and potentially in some ways Virginia's success means that more Virginia families want that. And at some point you start to not have enough of the federal childcare funds to support the demand that really exists in Virginia. The childcare subsidy program was never, it was set up to provide states with flexibility, but was really never sort of fully set up to say, we will fund every family who's eligible and needs and wants it. And so then it really kind of leaves the question to the states on, okay, if you've got Virginia families that want this to be able to work or go to school or pursue greater self-sufficiency, how might you tackle that? And that's just simply where the federal dollars ultimately fall short. And I think that this commission will need to grapple with what would make sense in terms of financing as we go forward.
Great, thank you.
And then Delegate Cherry, you had a question about the sort of relative change in the overall sort of private versus public financing of the system. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, it was just the question of, she was talking about how much money was going into the vouchers, but how much is still being invested by the individual families? And what's the ratio of that? How much is still going from the private dollars versus the public dollars?
So that is a great question, Delegate. The real challenges that always remain for us from data is we never know exactly how many privately funded kids are on the system, and therefore how much is sort of private revenue. We can often look at national statistics, which suggest that over about 2/3 of the sort of overall funding is private paying families. That looks very different in affluent communities, for example, in the same way you might have a lot of private schools, you're going to have a lot more private childcare. In lower income communities, it's going to look much, much lower than that. But we can approximate using national data, but the real challenge is we just don't track private childcare enrollment and revenues for the Commonwealth. But great question. And we'll go back and look and see if there's anything in terms of national or outside research, but it's just because we don't track private kids. I do want to note, though, a little bit of, this is maybe not where you're going, Delegate Cherry, but an important point to note. And I think Benita mentioned this earlier, and I know this is conversations I've had with Travis and others. You have to be very cognizant that it is a public-private mix. And so as Virginia has set forth expectations about measurement and improvement, we recognize that these are vouchers, right? And so some programs will take a mix of dollars, including, maybe 10% of their kids are voucher kids, and other programs might be 90% voucher kids. And it's important, and part of the reason we shared the data on the willingness of providers to take public dollars is that's an important barometer of success, in that it hasn't become so onerous that private programs can't take the dollars and make it work. And that is really key. We work very closely with the Child Care Association. We work very closely with Estonia and the Family Child Care Association to watch that, because we want accountability, we want return on investment, but we need the private sector, we need the faith-based, we need the private programs. And so making sure that we're doing that with them rather than to them is really, really important, when you understand that voucher growth really hinges on private programs being willing to take public dollars, and what are the strings attached to those public dollars. And the vast majority of programs are still relying on some private dollars. So you have to be very conscious of that as you make some of these decisions about financing policy and practice for early childhood. That's it. All the questions, all the data. All right, turn your sheets over. There will be a quiz. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Any other questions from the Zoom or from the audience?
I have a question, which actually might be more for the Secretary of Labor. But what's striking, and if my data is wrong, tell me that, Gemma and Elliot. But nationwide, I think there are about 2 million early childhood educators, of which 94% are women. Mm-hmm. And I think have we looked at, or should we look at? This is an opportunity for us to value roles that are typically served and filled by women, which as a nation, we tend to undervalue that type of work. And I think we could really, from a best in class perspective, and I'm really, the results are phenomenal in terms of what we've been able to build, but to be able to say, let's make an investment in the type of work that's being done, and to really lead the way in terms of compensation, in terms of value, and what that actually means for an equitable workforce. Mm-hmm.
So very, very important that we've looked at the workforce. It is significantly female. When you look at early child, it is the compensation does lead to a set of problems. When you look at turnover, when you look at being able to fill classrooms, I think we also know that when we talk about school readiness, like young children learn in the context of relationships with adults. Like if there's anything that the pandemic taught us, and anybody who had a baby during the pandemic, you can try to put a screen or, leave a child alone. It simply will not work. And so really looking at those workforce issues and tying it all the way back to the goal of this administration to make this one of the best states to live, work, and raise a family really hinges on that workforce, and thinking about how do you tie this idea of, okay, this is not only attractive because we believe and value paying these individuals more, but we can show, and we tried to include some of that data today, we can show the direct connections to the Virginia GDP, right? To the unemployment, like to the competitiveness of a community or region's ability to attract new employers, or to sort of say to the co-stars, we want to grow we want to double in Richmond because we feel like the early childhood and K-12 system is so strong that folks want to move here. And I do think those are all directly related to each other.
Oh, there you are. I'm going back to the slide earlier about $80,000 median income for a household. If you have 2 kids, it's $30,000 expense. So if you do the math there, let's say one of the spouses makes
50,000. So the other one, let's say they make $15 an hour, that will not cover, if you do the math, it doesn't cover their childcare expense. So why, I mean, they would have, and that doesn't even take into consideration the taxes that might be on it. So it's a no brainer, and that's probably right around what some of the daycare providers are making. Yeah. So it's a no brainer. If you want the economic boom, if you want a robust economy, if you want all ships and boats to rise in the harbor, you've got to pay people for the work that really matters. And this is coming from a social worker, but I'm speaking for the teachers here too.
Yeah. I know this wasn't on there, but a quick question I had was kind of flipping this on its head. Is Virginia doing anything to incentivize businesses to provide any benefits in this space? For instance, contributing more to dependent care FSAs, or giving I'm fortunate that I get my company has a relationship with a provider where we get 10% off, which equates to a month of care a year.
Yeah.
Or, anything in those spaces that, the Commonwealth is looking at. How can we incentivize businesses on the other end to help their employees, not just, it's important and we should do this, but are we looking at, or have we done anything in that space yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think certainly a part of the charge of this commission is to think of different mechanisms, right? I mean, I think it's almost like taking Delegate Bulova's question about, K readiness and how it feels so big. I think when you look at the charts and the dollars, you're like, wow, this also feels big, but thinking through, okay, what might be a set of recommendations? How might we get a better partner with the private sector to make this investment? How might we think about options, in terms of public resources as well? I think that works. We still, I will note though, we have not seen, and Elliot can probably contribute this, a situation in which the private sector can resolve this entirely. And I think that's a really important realization, that particularly for those of us who've been working in this space and looking at the micro and macroeconomics, for at least for me for the last decade, that there's just, thinking about how you would get there, how to make that investment, who cares most about that investment, and really sort of seeing it more as like, okay, the return on investment is so long for employers. Like, it might be short term in terms of getting these folks to work, and then the sort of, ultimately their future workforce. But the real value is in the public good of having kids come in more prepared, maximizing the K-12 system, and thinking about, okay, what would be the right mix of public and private investment and incentives to kind of get there. But I think everything should be on the table as Virginia contemplates what's next. Any other, oh my God, I see all the Post-its in the back. Any other questions, concerns, Delegate Coiner or others, before we get into small groups?
Right, Jenna.
Yes.
I think I would add, we do have, you look at the opposite of the spectrum, looking at our college system, and we've worked really hard to help hold tuition costs, right, for families. And we've worked really hard at incentives in that area. And I think there's some lessons we can take from what we've done in the higher education and back over into our early education side. But then also looking at ways that we incentivize businesses to participate as well. Having a lot of conversations with 2 working parent households about, one of us takes the certain benefits that we get for healthcare and other things, and the other can receive benefits that they're able to use for childcare. But starting to have some conversations, we're fortunate to have a lot of business representatives on this commission about ways that the private sector can participate as well, because neither one, the private nor the public, can solve this on their own. And so really looking at this as a joint effort between labor and education. So hopefully we come up with some ideas that we can take that improve in both areas.
All right, and I don't know if folks on Zoom, you can see it because I think it's a little bit to the, we're going to move it over, but we're going to pivot and start to hear from you. There's been a lot of hearing from us, but we wanted to make sure that we provide level set around the landscape, the strengths, the 7 things that make Virginia so strong, and also tee up a candid conversation. And Delegate Coiner, our chair, did a great job of a segue as we start to think about, okay, what are these gaps and what are the various values and recommendations we begin to make from that, noting, I think that's really important, that there's not going to be sort of one silver bullet or one size fits all, but really sort of tapping into the best of the public and private sector, which is honestly what makes our early childhood system so strong. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elliot.
Thank you. And I want to pick up on that point and then give a very high level summary of what we heard back from you before you get into your school, small group conversations. But I do want to pick up on the exchange that Jenna and Delegate Coiner just had, because I think it's important. This is something, one of my pandemic readings was about how education is actually 3 different kinds of goods at the same time, right? It is a public good, right? It is good for all of us that the community is well educated and that our colleagues are well educated. It's a private good, right? It's good for me to be well educated. And it's a positional good, which means like it's good for me to be better educated than that guy so that I can get a job that he can't, right? And the thing is, the balance among those, right? Those are all genuine values in the system. And the balance among those looks very different in early childhood than in K-12, because in K-12, right, it is required that the kids show up, and the state essentially sort of requires school districts to take whoever comes. And neither of those things are true in early childhood. And what that ends up meaning is that early childhood, the positional differences end up being quite large, right? Because it is treated more as a private good. There's historical roots of that. And that will remain in the system and should remain in the system, right? It is a private good, and that the role of families or of employers is critical. But it is also a public good that children have positive experiences in those first 5 years. And one of the conversations to have is about how do you strike the right balance among those values, which different people in this room may hold somewhat differently. So I want to give, so with that said, I want to give a very high level summary of what everyone has said so far. And again, first of all, I want to thank all of you. You all have better handwriting than I do. So that makes this really helpful. One of you comes close. But that a few things that we heard as sort of themes from the conversation so far. So in terms of must-haves, right? A lot of people talking about access, right? Like, and making sure that people can, that families can access what they need, and that access requires high quality teachers, settings, right? Like, you need the people to do that. And to have those people, you need money, right? So that the funding piece definitely came up from a number of you. And then not just that you have an option, but that you have choice, right? That families have some options they can go to. The workforce, right? And some people had some more specific comments, but that in general, the need to have good working conditions for educators and pay them an adequate salary. And then also important that people talked about parent voice and stakeholder input, right? That's a kind of accountability, right? Like that the system should be accountable to the people using it, and that communities, again, because this is a public good, have some stake in this, and that their voices should be heard as well. And that transparency is a part of that too, right? What data do you have and how are you using it to improve the system? So the question, when successful, what will result from the commission's work, right? And some important focus on the environments that kids are going to be in, right? And how they will experience the system. And again, themes that we've heard before, that will come from increasing access to the system, and that, ultimately what the commission's going to develop is, and a few people made this point, that there will be a thoughtful, data-driven process that helps all children meet their full potential as adults. In terms of who will benefit, right? Again, multiple people benefit. That's why it's a public, private, and positional good, right? So a number of people talked about how valuable pre-K is for school readiness and the importance of the overall community. Other people talked about the importance of relieving stress on families, right? And creating access, particularly in some rural areas. A number of people pointed that out. And people did also talk about, in terms of making it more affordable, how do you bring in the private sector, right? What is the role of the private sector in that? And how do you make sure that, you know, again, different people have voice in the design process? So we also heard a lot from you about assets and gaps. You can look, you know, like if you've ever seen like detective shows where there's like the big wall of crazy, like as they try to find the real killer, like that's what this looks like to me. And, you know, anyone who wants to come and add some strings to help with that process is more than welcome. But that a few things that people talked about, right? So in terms of assets, right, again, that childcare promotes job growth. That the state has been targeting the children who need it the most, that the regional model allows for, you know, flexibility, and that it really is, again, responsive to local needs, that you have dedicated leaders who are really committed to this, again, many of whom are in this room, that the state has been thoughtful about maximizing federal funding and leveraging its state funding. And then also, you know, that there is this focus on learning and readiness, right? That it's not just about, can we keep the kids safe while their parents are at work? It's about thinking about their longer term outcomes. On gaps, and this is the gaps column, even though the word gaps is actually covered, you know, a number of themes emerge. I mean, one is money, right? Like, how are we supporting the workforce? How do we increase compensation? That really speaks to the supply, that there aren't enough educators to do the work. Again, that was one of the major themes that came through, and a number of you had some really thoughtful variations on that theme, but for the moment, I'm sticking to the themes. Some of this came down to people saying that rates weren't high enough, right? That you know, the state was doing something to put money in the system, but that need to sort of amplify that work. And that also, you know, again, a couple of people pointed out the role of the private sector, right? Like, what can we do to better leverage employers and their role in this? Because again, they don't have the only interest, but they have an interest. There's also a number of folks who talked about the importance of growing capacity for data translation, right? Again, that people saw that as an asset, but they wanted to build on it. And that ultimately, again, they're focusing on, you know, a number of people pointed out that we need to improve child outcomes. And that means that one of our gaps is, you know, that we are not providing enough high quality experiences to children. So that was a very fast, high level summary of a lot of really great comments. And we're going to keep these and capture them, and so that the commission's work ultimately benefits from that nuance. But before we get into small group discussion, any big points people want to make for the group that I didn't just capture?
Elliot, if I could add out in Zoom world, you know, as I'm looking at the chart behind you and having so many more sticky notes on the gap side than assets, I think we're like all folks, when we look at things, we're looking for the gaps more than the assets in presentations. But I don't want to minimize how many amazing assets we have in the Commonwealth and the work that everyone has done. Our system is amazing. So like all good folks, we tend to focus on where we have gaps more often than what's already working really well. I'm sure if we went back and only listened for assets, we would triple those sticky notes as well. But just wanted to point that out there, because folks who've been working in this area have done a tremendous job.
I had the same thought, so thank you for emphasizing that. And again, part of the, you know, we're here in many ways to focus on the gaps, right? And how do we build on what needs to be done? But really important, again, as an outsider looking in, I see a lot of great strengths and sort of key ideas on the table that a lot of states are going to need to do some work to even get to the point that you're at. So again, want to emphasize that real, you know, real important piece of context. And again, excited to see where you all can take this. And so on that note, let's break into small groups and, you know, have some discussion at your table. And we will then come back together to report out before we wrap things up. So if anyone has any questions, I know that the staff and I will be floating. Is there anything I'm supposed to say that I didn't just? 15 minutes. So 15 minutes at your table. And the folks on Zoom, you guys are going to talk to each other. So if you are able to come on video, that's probably good. And I definitely wanted to add, by the way, like one of my advocacy colleagues for many years has said one of the keys to good early childhood advocacy is bringing the baby into the room. So for the folks on Zoom who did literally that, thank you for doing that. All right, have at it. All right. It is exciting to see everyone at the tables want to continue the conversation. And I hate to be the jerk who has to end it, but that is actually my job right now. Let us start with the red table reporting out. So I don't know who's going to do that, and blue table, you're going to be up next. So red table, who's your speaker?
We talked a lot about the different provisions between childcare and preschool. I brought that up a lot, and just the intentionality of the education component, and also the stresses of the providers and how different they are. Whereas, you know, frequently the preschool teacher, you know, it's a small number of hours they work, whereas someone that is in a daycare setting, it's a lot of hours, and there's often another job as well. So that's the synthesis.
Thank you. All right, blue table and yellow table, you're up next.
All right, we talked about assets, gaps, and then some ideas. So from an asset perspective, we think that, you know, our budget surplus, you know, financial health of the Commonwealth is a positive. We also want to acknowledge the focus, recognition, and the intentionality of what we're trying to achieve. We recognize there's a need, and the progress and the journey that we're on, you know, just what we've been able to accomplish in a short time and what we'll be able to continue to do. You know, the gaps, we talked about this a lot, the inability to meet the current need of the most vulnerable. You know, the fact that we're not meeting the lowest income need is a gap that we need to overcome. We're just at the tip of the spear. Childcare is unaffordable across the spectrum until you get to, you know, the very, very high income group. We talked about, you know, if we're not meeting the most vulnerable, then the impact on, you know, the middle income who don't qualify for subsidies and are still squeezed. Some of the ideas we talked about is, you know, we can provide parent subsidies, but we can also look at subsidizing centers where we provide incentives for private businesses to take subsidies and to make it more economically viable for them to do those for those who are not opting in. We could also subsidize the teachers. We could look at some of the tuition forgiveness and other incentives for CDAs, but also for 4-year degrees as well. And apprenticeships. So setting up apprenticeships to attract more into the field of early childhood education to be able to fill some of these workforce gaps. Did I cover everything?
All right. Yeah, go ahead. All right, so next up is yellow, and then we'll go to the virtual group and then green.
On asset, I think we agreed, and in particular, because we have Travis here, that the the Ready Regions has been a great thing. And then we've talked about a number of things here. One being just purely the workforce issue, that until we can tackle staffing, it's really hard to talk about a number of these other things, because if there's not somewhere for the children to go, then how do we even talk about outcomes and the things down the road if we don't have teachers able to get there? And we had a similar idea about subsidies. Something else we talked about a little bit, which probably is, I don't know if I want to say it, we'll say it, but you know, in K through 12, there's local government matches that happen for dollars and things like that. What's happening there? And then also, I think we talked, she took notes. I'm reading her notes because she's smarter than me. The schedule alignment, something that's really hard for families when you get in pre-K is pre-K ends 2:30. Workday does not end at 2:30. And so then what do you do for that later half of the day? Infant care, like Senator Sudeline said, is typically, maybe you can, if you're lucky, you can find that till 5:30. So you can rush home at 5 and pick your kids up by 5:30 or incur a late fee or whatever. And so that alignment of people's work schedules with early childhood schedules really creates friction all around for families. And I'm sure there was 100 other things, but those are some of the things we talked about.
These are great. Thank you. Let's get the group. Let's get the group that was online to report out.
Yes, like everyone else, we talked about a number of things, the unified measurement system, the standards that are in place, but like the other group, staffing came up as one of the assets. Was there's a incentive through Ready Regions for home centers and that kind of stuff to give additional pay to their staff, but there's still a difference in pay. And even into the school system, there are more demands on the preschool teachers. So teachers are electing to either go to higher grades to work instead of coming to pre-K. We also talked about some of our high quality instruction engagement comes from persons who do not have or cannot get their teacher certification. They may have a degree or may need a couple classes towards their degree, but they're given that high quality instruction. And for the public school, they need that teacher certification. And then for Head Start programs that are not under a public school, there are different demands on those teachers. So we looked at the same staffing. We talked about some of the same things with closing that gap as far as incentives. Our teacher assistants are able to get into programs to help pay for their college courses to help them become teachers, or our teachers are able to get assistance with any coursework that's needed, but some of that does not assist with the workforce that are childcare, family care centers, and they struggle with maintaining even staff in those situations. So just like the other groups, that staffing is a big area, because if we don't have the persons in front of the children providing those high quality interactions, we're still not meeting our school readiness goals.
Great, thank you. And then finally, the green table.
Thanks. We had a lot of questions, so we spent a lot of time asking one another questions, but from the looks on people's faces, I bet others did as well. But I mean, we definitely agree that the Commonwealth has instituted strong assets in mixed delivery and in changes to subsidy. And I'll just add to that, changes in how subsidy is set versus how it used to be based on a market survey, which created kind of a vicious cycle for certain parts of the state. So it's much better now and more equitable. But we talked a lot about how families and resource-strapped centers may be struggling to take advantage of those resources, and that might be an impediment for, especially for low-income families who are really in survival mode every day. Do they have the ability to identify those resources and go after them effectively on their own? And is that one of the barriers that's maybe making those underutilized? And then we talked a lot about pipeline development and compensation as barriers to meeting demand with increased capacity, and how do we address that? And wondered if any studies had been done on what the gap looks like between what childcare, I'll call them childcare professionals, are being paid now, maybe by market versus where we believe they should be paid. And so we can sort of identify that gap and go after how do we fill that gap effectively and increase capacity.
Great. So that puts a bunch of stuff on the table. And what we want to do in the next few minutes is talk about what are our top priorities. And I want people to be thinking about how they want to jump in on that. I want to offer a couple thoughts before we get started. One is, it seems pretty clear that one cross-cutting theme is the workforce, right? That like you cannot do this without talented professionals, and you cannot have those without some amount of resource to pay them, right? And to the point you were just making, I was at a presentation last week where someone from another state was saying that the stat that she uses was that according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data in her state, that dog walkers and pet care actually get paid more than childcare workers, so that you're better off taking care of dogs than kids, right? I don't know exactly what statistics will resonate in Virginia. I'm sure you have a barrage of them, but that the idea that like you need to pay more for the professionals who are working with kids and do that systemically, right, is something that cut across multiple groups and obviously through the rest of the day. One other piece I want to pull out, and again, would be interested to hear particularly some of the providers and family representatives talk about, is a couple of the comments folks made from the tables reflect sort of the gap between policy and reality at times, right? So again, the point you made about like, there are funding streams, but can they be accessed? The point that was made at this table about like, there are pre-K slots and there are parents who are interested in them, but can they actually access them, because does that meet their needs as working parents, right? There are a number of little places where those disconnects can start to add up. And I'll say, right, that's a category of problems where having really strong local and regional infrastructure can be super helpful, because those folks, again, are sort of closer to the implementation reality than state government and can provide a conduit of feedback that you can act on. But that one of the things, that I get the sense that folks in this commission really care about is not just sort of how do we change policy, but how do we change the experiences of children and families, and being thoughtful about how far policy gets you down that road and what else needs to happen is potentially a really valuable impact the commission can have. So those were just like a couple of things that I distilled from what you all were saying, but I'm just facilitating and it's your commission. So I want to make sure that other folks have a chance to jump in, and Becca's got a mic. So if folks want to follow up and say more about top priorities, please do.
I was just going to comment. So Elliot, when I was looking at schools and pre-K programs when we moved here, many of them are 9 to 2, and that's the extended day. Most of them are 9 to noon, and the extended day is 2. And I asked several directors, well, what do you do from 2 to 5? And I came from a program that was 7 to 6 year round. And it was one of the best programs in the state that I was in. So like, I was very, very, very spoiled. And she said, well, you hire a nanny. Well, nannies are $25 to $32 an hour. So that's the gap that we're talking about here. Now, could you find someone for yet less? I'm certain you can, but at the end of the day, these are some of these trade-out choices that we're talking about. In reality, 9 to 2 as an extended day program doesn't work for anybody who's working full-time.
And the broader point there, and we'll get the mic over here, is that thinking about how the different pieces of the system, right, like childcare, pre-K, Head Start work together, in a lot of places, sort of it takes multiple funding streams to support meeting the family's needs, right? Like I know some states have policies where if a child is in childcare all day and they leave the childcare for 2.5 hours to go to preschool at the school, the childcare provider still gets paid for that time, right? Like, so that it creates an incentive for the childcare provider to get that kid to the pre-K, right? Because obviously if you're a childcare provider and you're going to lose money by handing a kid over to someone else, you're not going to be in a rush to do it, right? So like, what are the things you can do to make it worth everybody's while to put together a full day of services for families?
Yeah, I'm glad there's General Assembly members and senators in this group, because it really comes down to you guys that are entrusted with the money and what we're going to, what we believe in. And how do you make the case? The governor is doing this right now with mental health and basically realizing that the hospitals are overflowing. People are going to jail in crisis with, they really have mental health issues, and really try to take care of it. We need to, I'm so glad this commission is doing this. This is really a big asset. I haven't seen this in a long time, to move it forward. And, we're seeing during COVID, the lack of psychosocial skills, emotional regulation with kids, because they did not have that socialization that's going to come in either a preschool or a good daycare. They didn't get that at home, maybe with just mom. They won't get that alone with a nanny. And we need to pay it. If nannies are getting that much, there's your competition. If we want people with bachelor's and early childhood education taking care of our kids, we need to pay a living, wage for somebody educated at that level, and quit saying they can make better money at Taco Bell. I mean, you don't need a high school diploma to work at Taco Bell. So we have to push this.
Well, and that speaks to another theme that I think people have been bringing up, which is this isn't just about policy change. Again, it's about the child experience and child outcomes, right? And sort of keeping that in mind as a top priority of like, how is everything you're recommending leading to improved child outcomes, right? And what are the things that do that? And again, seems pretty clear consensus from the conversation I've heard so far that strengthening the workforce is part of that, but would be interested if people have other things they want to put on the table as critical, to make sure we're capturing those here.
One thing I want to say, coming from the local government standpoint, is a lot of times when these policies are passed, they come with financial price tags. And a lot of the reasons why some things are falling through the cracks now are when it comes with that price tag, a lot of those prices come down on your local governments, your locales, and your locales just do not have the money in their budgets. They're already barely making it by. They don't have the money in their budgets to fund these, even down to teacher pay. That's why I think in a lot of locales, teachers aren't getting paid what they should be getting paid according to what our state says they should be getting paid. Because when those price tags come down, if the state says we're going to give you 2%, but you have to put in 3%. We don't have 3%, so the teachers therefore get nothing. So that is something that I really, really want us to look at as a commission, is if we're implementing something that comes with the price tag, how is the state going to help the locales to implement this without more added stress on your locales? Also, I think we have a lot of agencies within the state of Virginia that we don't take advantage of. And a lot of agencies, I feel like, are out here on the island by themselves, and they only hit a small realm of the public, even down to your workforce development agencies. Workforce development has a lot of great things going on right now. They have a lot of programs that will pay people to go back to school to get that extra training. They have a lot of programs that will actually pay for your education. And when I say pay for you to go back, they will write a check directly to you to go back to school. But a lot of people don't take advantage of these programs. Why? Because they don't know about it. Because what are we doing? We don't do a good job of telling our own stories in a lot of the cases here in Virginia. Even down to the G3 program. A lot of people aren't taking advantage of that. That's an awesome program that the state came up with. What are we doing as far as agencies partnering with other agencies to make sure that we're not falling through the gaps and we're not trying to recreate the wheel of something that already exists?
So yeah, I think that second point you made about taking advantage of assets that are underutilized is so critical. And again, something that this commission can potentially put some thought into. I also want to come back to your first point, because I think it speaks to the conversation we were having earlier about, there are a lot of folks who are contributing to the system in some way, right? State government the federal government contributes, state government contributes, local government contributes, parents contribute. And if we're being honest, a lot of teachers are contributing and professionals are contributing by making less money to do this than they would be driving for Uber or working at Taco Bell, right? So the question of who should be paying for what is one that's worth sorting out, right? Because it's not all state government's job. But the question of what is the right role for state government is one that, again, there's a lot of people here who might have some different thoughts, but it's a conversation worth having. So sorting that out could be a great outcome of this process too. We've got someone online. Oh, Delegate Coiner.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the other things, to figure out, we still have a lot of providers who are choosing not to participate in our public-private system. And we don't have data on how kids are doing, nor are we able to utilize those providers for needed slots that we're able to fund. So I think that's one of the questions to try to answer, is how we encourage more providers. We've talked a lot about parents needing to know that they can have access, but also how we increase providers. And then we also talked, it was interesting, Simon brought up in our group about just some regulations that get in the way of providers versus the K-12 system. Some things at the state level that we've exempted our K-12 system from, but not our providers in early childhood. And therefore, teachers tend to either leave and go over into our K-12 system. So it was interesting to hear some regulations we could also address and work on.
That's a great point too, and that the thing about regulations is, I was having this conversation with someone at lunch, right? Like, if you don't have regulations, you don't get public accountability and outcomes for children. But that if you have too many regulations, you essentially sort of strangle the field, and striking that right balance is really hard. And if you're seeing, again, if the data is telling you that there are providers who could be participating in the state system but aren't, what are there does that lead you to some specific actions the state can take to take better advantage of those assets? So that's another great question that the group can potentially dig into. Other thoughts? We have a few minutes left, so would love to make sure that if people have things they want to share, that we're getting to them.
Simon, we saw you put something in the chat. Do you want to unmute and share that with the group?
Yes, I was just piggybacking off the lady in the crowd there who spoke before. She was sort of getting to that, but this workload overall, I know a lot of this comes with, there'll be a new data system, there'll be a new funding request, form that you get, whatever it may be. But we talked about that as a group of community action, along with several folks from the national area, and just about the workload that all of us have taken on, as well as we try to keep staff and remember that not all of this is money. That individuals don't leave their job because of money. It's usually they're unhappy with management or with regulations, and I think that's just as important. And also, it could be free, which is more important for all, especially all the legislators in the room, that we look at regulations as well, as a way to help ourselves out of this. And some of that may be actually taking things off their plates, if that's possible. So I think that takes a little more creativity, but I do think there are options out there.
That's a great point, Simon. And we, the group's talked a lot about the experience of children and families. It's also the experience of professionals, right? Not just how much they're getting paid, but what is the environment and the ecosystem around them? And are there things we can do to make that better and more appealing? I think we still have a couple minutes left. Folks, I know that we've been at it for kind of a while, so really appreciate your sticking with it.
Just have a question to a couple of the points that have been made. And I guess the question is for the ECF or maybe one of the Reading Region's leaders that are in the room, in terms of, because part of that system is to help childcare providers elevate quality and take advantage of mixed delivery and subsidy and things like that help them get more revenues. I know there are some success stories there, but I'm wondering if there are funding limitations that we need to consider and address in terms of shared service models and things like that would be beneficial to supporting struggling centers that are having trouble taking advantage of some of these resources. I don't want anybody to hear a message, because I think if we if this commission simply was able to preserve the things we've already done moving forward and find a funding mechanism, sustainable funding mechanism for them, I think that would be a huge win. So what we're talking about is really that plus optimizing some things. So that was kind of a long-winded question, but Kathy or Travis or somebody else might be able to answer it.
Well, I would say that it's working, and there needs to be more of that investment to do that. But it's also is still challenged in that participation level of, well, I could take on more, but I don't have the teachers to do that or to fill that classroom. Something thinking about that shared service model that keeps coming to my mind is when we think about this, the numbers game, as well as the talent retention and recruitment. A lot of these providers and the staff do not have health insurance, but I think it was recently the governor signed legislation that allows the realtor associations to group together to do health insurance, and maybe a shared service model helping childcare centers group together to provide health insurance or things like that could be. I think we're going to have to think a little outside the box, but I think that there's a lot of great work happening in mixed delivery. I think it tends to be more of how do we continue to scale that.
And I think it's important to understand that even in what we talk about, our approach is a tiered approach, right? And right now we are literally at the tip of the spear. We're not yet meeting the needs of those most at risk in Virginia. And yet we are, by and large, when we talk about the middle class in Virginia, childcare is still incredibly expensive. How do we meet both those most at risk and then have a tiered planned out approach? That's not in the next 2 years. That's not in the next 5 years. But we've got to find some relief for those middle class that don't qualify for subsidy, but that childcare is just incredibly expensive and it's costing more than college.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that there are priorities, but there's also an entire ecosystem where the availability of services for anyone impacts everyone else. And thinking about it in those holistic terms is going to be really key. Jenna's got a comment.
Building on those points, I think when you think about the questions that came up about supply and increasing capacity, and Virginia has taken this incremental approach in response to family demand, I think we also, it's an incredibly mom and pop industry, right? I mean, like if you look at other than the Kinder Cares, the Bright Horizons, like all of a sudden it drops down to folks have one location. And so thinking both about how do you on the back end share services, but as you think about your growth strategy, it's less about we need to get 1,000 new operators than we need to support these operators, who exist where there are more kids to be served to grow and to scale sites and because if you know how to do it well, like how to look for talent, how to hire and retain teachers. To Simon's point about, you don't just leave because of the compensation. There's also multiple factors at play here, and really thinking about how do we think about that back end to address some of the things that are easier to afford at scale, like health insurance, and then a really intentional public-private strategy that leverages where folks are and says the fastest way to grow is to help good programs increase how many kids they can serve, right? Rather than we have to attract a whole bunch of new entrepreneurs when all of you know across your industries how tight it is to hire right now.
All right, we're just about at time, but one more comment.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think also just from a workforce development as well, is you want to think about what jobs cannot be exported and what jobs cannot be replaced. This is a perfect example. Technology will disrupt jobs over the next 5, 10, 15 years. We know that, we see that. This is a high touch job. It supports a local economy, supports the Commonwealth economy, and they can't be replaced, they can't be exported. And that's the most ideal type of job you can create. And so if we put some energy behind that, and I think expansion is the key, because you don't need to necessarily attract new if you can just provide the infrastructure to expand. It becomes then that economic development factor that you talked about at the very start of the day.
All right. Thanks to all of you for staying so focused and on task throughout all of this. It's been great. And with that, we have a lot to chew on. And again, some of the priorities that we've identified are summarized here. We will be following up, obviously, and getting more materials to you afterwards. But for now, again, I want to thank you for your engagement and turn it over to Dr. Lisa Coombs.
Well, I think being 3 months into Virginia, I'm incredibly proud to be a Virginian and to actually live here, because I have been doing early childhood work in Tennessee for 4 years as the chief academic officer, and never did we have a room of business leaders, legislative members, educators, people who are in the field of early childhood across sectors come together and have great conversations about the amazing work you're doing. First of all, this is the amazing work. And I want to give a shout out to Jenna, Delegate Coiner, Secretary Slater, Secretary Gadara, because there's a massive amount of work that has been accomplished in Virginia that is not happening anywhere else. And it was really heartening to hear all those conversations and hear the great work and really problem solve around sustainability. How do we get through some of the situations that we're involved in? How do we work through that? How do we continue to move forward? So I'm incredibly blessed to be here, but incredibly thankful that each of you have spent so much time today really focusing on helping us get this to be a sustainable space. I'm going to read these 2 questions that Jenna asked me to make sure that we talked about, because I am not going to mess up for my deputy superintendent. Based on the discussion you heard today, what are the most important considerations for the commission when developing recommendations for financing the Virginia's early childhood system? So is there anything that we have talked about or have not talked about today that you want to reiterate as we close about the considerations around financing? Anything else that you want to make sure that we're capturing today? Someone's have to help me with behind me.
This might be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Considering we're talking about families being strapped for money to pay for this, I think that we should just make sure that it doesn't cost families more in order to pay for whatever funding we're doing, because that would be counterintuitive.
Very good point. Any other closing comments on that financing piece? And then next time we come together, we are going to meet in August. We are going to really dig in on those capital issues, those human capital, those workforce issues that we've been talking about, the healthcare issues, and focusing deeply on quality. I think one of the things that got me most excited when I sat down with Jenna, she's like, we use class everywhere. We use this data system. We use this data system in Head Start. We use this data system in private-public partnerships. I was like, I am just got this off the ground in Tennessee, and it is amazing the amount of data. We talked at our table today about quality and differences in quality based on socioeconomic factors. I think the amount of data we have, and Elliot, you spoke to this earlier, which I'm really appreciative of, allows us to really dig in and look at this in different ways in a unique context in Virginia that we're not able to do in most all other places in the country. So there were really good questions today, really good pushes that we can go back in and actually look at the data and start to help posture and give you feedback on some of those things, and really incredibly proud that we have that access and we have that data to be able to drive decision making for our conversations as a commission. So I also want to thank Kathy. I have had the opportunity to get to know her over the past couple months, and to have such a champion for our earliest little people is incredibly a wonderful blessing. So thank you very much for all the work you're doing. Oh, we can clap for a second. Yes. Your advocacy is just incredibly impressive. I also want to mention that Secretary Gadara had an emergency and had to leave. She's very disappointed that she cannot be here the whole time, but asked me to comment on that. And then Elliot, thank you so much for facilitating, having conversations about the data and giving us that national expertise. I don't want to close without any logistical last minutes that I'm supposed to share. So Jenna, is there anything I missed? Senator, yes. I don't know what I'm doing the rest of the day, so I have to look at Jenna and she has to tell me.
August 29th.
Yes.
August
yes.
29th. Same time, 10 to 2.
And are we at this location?
To be determined.
Okay. Okay.
Tentatively, yes.
All right. Any additional Zoom questions? Well,
One more thing I would say, we've got all of the notes, the Post-its, the chats for those of you on Zoom. I sometimes will come out of a long meeting the next day, wake up and be like, oh, there was this one thing that I forgot to include yesterday when she asked for the last questions. Do not hesitate to email us if there's an insight, if there's a question. We'll follow up, I know, on Delegate Cherry's question, but in between now and August, if there's a priority that you want us to cover or something else that's a must do, just email us and we will make sure that that's reflected. We did not get any public comment today, but just for note of formality, we would read out public comment at this point if there were some.
Yep. I just want to thank everybody. It's just an incredibly exciting time to think about early childhood with this many different stakeholders and this much thought partnership and collaboration and advocacy. Thank you very much. Have a great day.